A doctor rushing to the clinic rescued a stray woman and child and left them the keys to the house, and after installing a camera. "Doctor, please save my baby boy," came from Linda's distraught female voice. "He's all I have. I'd pay anything to keep him alive." I turned my back for a second and he fell out the window. "Please save him. Help my boy." The woman's cry suddenly changed to the nasty beeping of an alarm clock. Edward, who had been daydreaming in bed, opened his eyes, struggling to focus on the alarm clock, and switched it off. He decided to lie in bed for a few more seconds to recover from the nightmare vision in which he had to listen again to the wails of the visitor who had rushed into the clinic just before closing time yesterday. Although sleep after a complex operation to red-haired frightened Kyle, who fell out of the window of the 5th floor, whether in pursuit of a bird that flew in, or for some other reason it could not be called sweet. But I didn't want to get up. Turning on his other side, Edward fell peacefully asleep again. As a result, when he woke up at the call of nature and glanced at his watch, it was actually time to leave the house. Edward had overslept. It was unusual, and he had to hurry so that he wouldn't be too late for the start of his appointment at the clinic. With the car needing time to warm up, and the snow that had fallen overnight making the traffic situation more difficult, Edward decided that it would be quicker to walk to the clinic than to take a private car, much less public transport. It was possible to walk across the private sector to the new buildings, one of which had a veterinary clinic on the ground floor. It would give him a chance to get to work on time, or at least as late as possible. Edward thought he should call the front desk, or, in the words of the clinic owner, the front desk, just in case. The phone rang at that moment. The screen showed an all-too-familiar number, listed under the uncomplicated name "Favorite Job." "I'm listening," Edward answered, getting dressed and putting his smartphone on speaker. "David, we've got a real emergency here. Barbara, a young recent graduate who dreamed of working at a veterinary clinic in any position, even receptionist, sounded agitated, which completely contradicted the meaning of the phrase. Apparently the workday hadn't started yet. Apart from Barbara and Linda, who remained on inpatient duty, there was no one else in the clinic. Without waiting for the surgeon's reply, the receptionist began to explain the reason for this dissonance in a verbose manner. Yesterday's visitor, who brought her boy, came even earlier than me. She said she needed to check on her precious boy before work. It was so strange, like a fighting woman, but standing on the porch, waiting for someone to come. She explained to me later that she didn't want to disturb the on-call inpatient, and this woman brought 3 huge bags of sausages, cheeses, cakes, and bottles, said it was for her boy's saviors. No matter how much I refused, it was useless. Anyway, I could barely fit all the supplies in the fridge. A little out of line, but I let the woman check on her boy. As she left, she wished us, you in particular, well and happiness. She left, promising to come back tonight. Edward had long ago guessed that he was attracted to the young Barbara, who was a relative of the clinic owner's wife, but he tried not to encourage the administrator with the possibility of an office romance. He'd had enough of young beauties leaving devastation in his heart. The previous workplace affair had ended very badly. Edward turned out to be a fool. He lost not only a decent amount of money, which he could survive, but also his faith in the decency of women. On top of that, he was fired from his job in just a few days. He had to move, and only thanks to the help of a trusted friend he managed to restore at least a semblance of his former prosperity. He realized that Barbara was just taking the opportunity to talk to him for as long as possible. But since the chatter didn't bother him, Edward didn't interrupt it. By the time Barbara stopped talking, he was fully dressed and ready to leave the house. "Barbara, I might be a little late, about 5 minutes, at most," he said. "Please apologize to the first patient, and I'll try to hurry up." "Understood, David. Take it easy and be careful. There's a hell of a lot going on the roads. I'll explain everything to everyone if you have to be late." "Thank you, Barbara. See you later." Edward closed the door, shook his head, noting that the cleared path had been covered in snow since the evening before, and continued onward, thinking wistfully that the way to the clinic was not going to be a fun walk. In principle, it was not so sad. The recent storm had left snowdrifts behind, but the weather was mild enough. The temperature hardly dropped below 5 degrees of frost, and the snowflakes that were late for the southern ball slid down in smooth movements. Beautiful, nothing to say, but there was no time to admire the scenery. The snow had managed to get into his not-so-tall boots, which made the man uncomfortable. Edward was in a hurry, but as he passed one of the benches in the neighboring street, he noticed a strange figure. The timid winter dawn was just beginning to reclaim its rights from the gray twilight. But the surgeon's professional eye immediately noticed that it was a very unfamiliar, even visually young girl. On her lap sat a boy of about 5 or 6 years old. 2 light jackets and thin caps could hardly be called clothes for the season. The snow on their shoulders and hats indicated that they had been sitting so still for at least a few minutes. Edward wanted to walk past, reassuring himself that it was none of his business. The stranger didn't ask for his help and sat silent. There was something bird-like about that resignation to fate. The girl covering the boy with herself on her lap was like a freezing sparrow. It was a strange sensation. Probably an untimely awakened conscience prevented the man from passing. Cursing himself for his seemingly long-forgotten sentimentality, Edward stepped closer to the stranger and asked her a question. "Do you need help?" the man asked. The boy looked at him sullenly and remained silent, and the stranger answered quietly with her lips. "Very much. We need help very much. We need money for tickets to get to our hometown. Is anyone going to be generous about it? Nobody cares. We've been wandering around here for 3 days, and nobody can help us. So we have to get out of here on foot. But if we could get some hot water in a thermos." I tried to ask at a 24-hour shawarma stand, but they turned me away. I've asked at several houses here too, but they won't even open their doors. Please don't go away. I beg you, give at least a mug of water to warm up a little, at least for the boy. Help." Edward felt uneasy. He was struck by the girl's last sentence, who on closer inspection did not look like a beggar at all. He realized that if he went home and boiled water, he would be much later for work than he had planned. Sure, Barbara would try to cover for him, but why would he want to get in trouble with management? He couldn't just leave without helping, though. "Maybe I'd better call you a taxi to take you home," said the man, reaching into his pocket for his smartphone. A shy smile of hope appeared on the stranger's face. "I would be very grateful, but we have to go to another city. The trip will cost about $1,000, especially considering the weather conditions. Of course, I'll pay you back almost immediately. Just give me your phone number. I can't believe our wanderings will be over soon. Oh, I can't believe it." The girl and her little companion looked nothing like the typical beggars Edward had heard about. The stranger seemed very sincere. There was so much doom in her voice, too, that even Edward, who was used to tears and hysterics at the clinic, felt sorry for her. Fearing that the stranger was about to start crying, the man decided not to address the girl again and asked the boy, who was starting to shiver from the cold. "Are you cold, my friend?" The child nodded, and Edward made an unexpected decision. "Tell you what," he said. "Take the keys and go to my house and get warm, and then I'll come back and we'll think about a way to get you back to your hometown. My house isn't far from here, just to the end of the street. Go through, turn right, and along the red metal fence you'll reach a gray gate. This is the big key. There's no dog in the yard, don't be afraid. You will open the house with this key, insert it upwards and turn it anti-clockwise. Electric kettle on the table brew, sugar and sweets on the shelves. In the fridge, however, there is nothing but cheese, but in the freezer, I think, remain dumplings. Use it, drink tea, and get warm. Have a rest. I'll be back tonight, we'll talk then. I'm sorry, but I'm in a hurry." He literally shoved a bunch of keys into the palm of a bewildered stranger and hurried to work. The doctor got to the clinic just in time, only 5 minutes late, although it could have been worse. Barbara happily greeted the handsome man, smiling broadly and trying to look as stylish as possible. "Hi," Edward answered her briefly. He looked at the status reports on the mustachioed Leva and the other inpatients who had passed through his hands. To the surgeon's delight, he hadn't noticed any alarming symptoms in anyone. He felt a little relieved. But true to his habit, the surgeon felt the need to see for himself that everything was normal. The first visitors were already waiting in the corridor, and Edward decided that he would go and check on the patients as soon as he had a moment to spare. The surgeon quickly changed into his uniform and began his appointment. The 2 elective surgeries had gone smoothly, without any complications, and he hurried off to check on the inpatients. Mustachioed Leva looked quite cheerful. He was looking both at his neighbors in the hospital and attentively watching the doctor, who was putting his paw back together piece by piece. The condition of the other animals did not cause any concerns either, and the man headed for the restroom with a clear conscience. Especially since it was lunchtime. Because of the missed breakfast, he really wanted to eat. It was too lazy to go to the cafe next door, so Edward decided that he would make do with what he could find in the fridge. He quickly made sausage sandwiches, which had apparently been brought by a generous relative of the patient who had caused him to stay late at work yesterday and oversleep, and who had let someone he didn't know into his house. However, the doctor did not have to enjoy the meal alone for long. When she noticed that the object of her attention had gone to the lounge, Barbara rushed in. "Edward, what are you eating dry?" she asked. "Let me heat up some pilaf for you. It's delicious. My mum used to make it. She's my mum. Or if you don't want pilaf, let me order something from the cafe." "Whatever you want, I'll order it." "Thank you, Barbara. Don't worry, it's fine," Edward said. "I'm quite happy with this meal. Can I at least get you some coffee or tea?" The man gently declined. "Am I infirm? Am I not able to pour my own coffee?" The question hung in the air because Edward, the radiologist, entered the lounge and decided to have some refreshments. Barbara, finding no more good reason to stay near Edward, hurried to her post. The surgeon was pleased to see a colleague with whom he shared not only a common place of work, but also a long-standing friendship. They had studied together, and since the group was dominated by girls, they stuck together. In fact, it had been the loyal Edward who had come to the rescue when Edward had had to rebuild his fortunes from the ground up and had presented his candidacy to the owner of the clinic in the best possible light. The charming man, who had an easygoing nature, never seemed to be in a bad mood, and he asked with his usual enthusiasm, "What are we having for lunch today?" "We can make sandwiches, and there are cakes in the fridge," Edward replied. Barbara offered to go to the cafe and get some food, but it felt awkward to exploit her. Edward grinned as he built himself a multi-story sandwich. "Good girl, this Barbara. And you can see with the naked eye that she's sighing for you, trying to like you," Edward said. "Oh, Edward, don't start," David said. "You know as well as I do that my whole life almost went down the drain because of the office affair." Edward didn't want to broach this painful subject any further and suggested conciliation. "Let's have a cake after work and go to the cafe like we used to." The conversation moved into a calm direction, not touching on hot topics. The men discussed the bad weather that had turned the roads into traffic jams. They recalled an old joke that winter in the city always comes suddenly. Taking advantage of the pause, David asked his friend, "Listen, if you were to come across freezing people in need of help in such clear weather, what would you do?" Edward answered after a brief pause as he absorbed his food. "Depends on where I'd find them. You know, it depends on the circumstances. If they're in the desert somewhere, let's say, it's a matter of life and death. But it's also a question of how the freezing people came to be so far from civilization. Maybe a storm caught them. As you remember, a few years ago in Arizona, motorists were rescued. That's a force majeure, no matter how you look at it. Although there were warnings. But hoping against hope, people decided to skip and got stuck on the motorway. Of course, if they had not been evacuated by special vehicles and had not organized hot meals, there would have been casualties. In general, each situation must be considered in detail. Give me a concrete example of someone freezing somewhere, and I will answer you then." David smiled. "Yes, Edward, you have a tendency from your youth to formulate questions precisely. Well, let's say people are sitting on a bench somewhere and are literally freezing in the city, practically in plain sight on the street. People pass by because they are indifferent to requests for help. You walk or drive by and notice that the situation is critical. People sit silently and don't even try to draw attention to themselves." Edward began to reason. "Well, first of all, I would have asked initially if my help was needed. Maybe people were just enjoying the fresh air, sitting there, not touching anyone, watching the hustle and bustle. And here I am, out of nowhere, a self-appointed lifeguard." David continued to develop the theme. "Okay. In the course of conversation, you find out that strangers need money to get to their homes. What would you do in that case?" Practical Edward immediately replied, "Well, that's another matter. If help was really needed, I would easily entrust it to competent services, police officers, medical workers, some charitable organizations. In general, in the modern world, only people who have no brains at all can freeze in the street. There are shelters, railway stations, shopping centers, all sorts of shops, entrances, heating pipes. Finally, if I saw someone freezing in the city, I would think that I just met fraudsters. In general, I do not want to help such careless entrepreneurs. They profit from gullibility, charity. There is no desire. Then again, one must always keep in mind the legality of it, so that when you lend a helping hand, you don't get a kick instead of a thank you. Edward laughed, but David caught the gust of mirth, not entirely sincerely. The kind man was uneasy at this point. Indeed, his morning's act was very far from common sense, about as far from the earth to the moon. Of course, he has nothing to take at home. The money is all on cards, and at home it is in his purse, in the pocket of his jacket. However, if suddenly a stranger turns out to be a fraud and steals an old laptop, it will be very offensive. Too much useful, and even, one could say, exclusive information is stored in his memory, both on work and all sorts of digitized photos which depict relatives, moments that once seemed mundane and in fact were truly happy. Yes, perhaps if the laptop goes missing, it would be an irreparable loss. Only now the doctor, as if finally waking up, was afraid he let into his house unknown people. He didn't even ask their names. Good deeds never go unpunished. That's what his father had told him. Was it time to be convinced of this truth once again? Edward was not unaware of his friend's changed mood, and he asked, "Why do you want to get so philosophical about helping people?" "I'm afraid to guess, but my intuition tells me it's for a reason." "Come on, tell me what I don't know about you." Even an old friend was ashamed to confess to committing a humane, but absolutely unreasonable act. But the surgeon was saved from confessing his own stupidity by Barbara, who entered the lounge and announced, "There's an unbooked patient with a corgi dog. A funny-looking one. Not the owner, but the dog. Of course, he's drooling. But yours is so affectionate, he's eager to meet everyone." "Who's the owner of the drooling and sociable one?" The radiologist had time to interject. But Barbara was not embarrassed. "Fred, I think, and the doggy is a year old." And he started limping. "Look at the doggy, David." The man got up from the table, and Edward followed him. "I see. Where's the limping dog?" "It's not going to be without me." Of course, Edward, defending the rights that sometimes try to make the staunch surgeon jealous, flirting with your friend. "Is your participation also necessary?" The girl abruptly turned round and hurried to her workplace. Friends, doctors also did not linger in the lounge. Helping patients first of all, they will talk later when they have free time. When talking to the new guest of the clinic, all extraneous thoughts went out of David's head. Although the case was typical for young dogs of large breeds, but for every owner, especially a newcomer in raising fast-growing giants, his dog is a special creature. The surgeon understood this perfectly well, so it was necessary, like perfectly learnt lessons, to explain everything delicately to the frightened owner of the dog and to tell in detail about the options of correction of the situation. After hearing the treatment options, prognosis, and approximate sums of money, the owner went to think, to consult with the breeder. David understood this position of the good-natured giant's owner. Keeping a dog can be costly if the pet suddenly develops problems. And of course, to hear an alternative opinion on treatment methods would not be unreasonable. Closer to 3 p.m., the flow of patients to the clinic dried up. Only near the therapist's office there were 2 visitors holding almost identical miniature dogs in their arms. The girls, like their pets, were also very similar. Long, loose hair the color of ripe wheat, eyelashes unnaturally thick, very plump lips as a tribute to a strange fashion. Perhaps they were sisters, but it was quite likely that their appearance had simply been modified by a plastic surgeon. They had their hair and makeup done by the same master. The girls enthusiastically took selfies with their pets, posing, choosing a more interesting angle, as if forgetting where and why they were. One of them soon started taking a video clip and, not shying away from anyone, started commenting on it. "Here you are, my dear subscribers. In such bad weather I had to come with my boy to this horrible place. Here we are not even served coffee and are forced to wait in the corridor. Doctors walk by and do not pay any attention to us. A complete ignorance. It's an outrage." I'm so worried. My boy didn't eat his food today, and they won't take us in." When she had finished filming, the visitor turned to David, who was passing by. "Hey, well, is anyone going to see us today? Is it hard to see a dog?" Trying to stay calm, the man replied. "Now the therapist will be free and will definitely see you." The capricious lady continued. "Don't you understand? I poured a whole glass of food into the bowl, he ate it, then the second one, but he didn't finish it. And here you have no one here to help us. You're walking down the corridor. You don't know what you're doing. You should take a look at my boy." David couldn't help noticing that the insistence of the visitor, who was undoubtedly spectacular but lacked personality, contrasted sharply with the doom in her gaze. It reminded him that he had actually planned to go home early. Right now, however, the reputation of the clinic had to be saved. David smiled, realizing that arguing with such a visitor was useless and would only hurt her, so he offered. "Well, since I'm a surgeon, I can certainly perform an examination." However, just at that moment, a man with a dachshund on a leash came out of the GP's office and, indignantly rejecting his help, left. The scandalous visitor, with her dog in her hands, walked to the very office she had planned to enter. David inquired of the girl, who remained outside the door. "Excuse me, are you here for an appointment too?" The girl, almost without thinking, stretched her plump lips dismissively. "No, of course I'm watching my future. We're just here for the company. We usually have all the vets come to our house. Me and my friend have been to like 10 vets. Today, as luck would have it, they were all busy." David politely wished her well. He didn't argue with clients or discuss his colleagues. So he didn't tell the girl why the vets wouldn't agree to go to her friend's pet. Obviously, the call was not urgent. But it was not only the weather conditions that were to blame for the refusal, although they could not be discounted. After all, there was a temporary lull in the clinic as well. As the doctor's many years of experience suggested, this calm would soon be replaced by a storm of emergency cases, in which the New Year holidays would be to blame. More precisely, not they themselves, but for the most part the carelessness of the owners eaten Christmas tree decorations, disordered eating, frostbite, injuries. Like who? And at the vet, and the holidays are a real hot season. However, the owner's carelessness and waste bring income to the clinic. It's the law of life. David cut off his own train of thought. Well, who could blame carelessness? I had given the keys to the house to a stranger out of my own kindness, which bordered on stupidity. Edward is right. There are many swindlers nowadays, and in what form they will appear, no one knows. Even the fact that there was a child with this poor, unseasonably dressed girl is no guarantee of her honesty. After thinking for a few more minutes, David decided to take a day off work. Good, if we take into account the forced overtime on emergency operations, it was possible to demand more than 1 week of rest. However, just in case, he warned Barbara. "If there's anything urgent, call me in 15 minutes, and I'll be there." Edward was a little puzzled by his friend's behavior, but he didn't bother asking. He would tell me if he wanted to. David didn't waste time calling a taxi, so he walked home. The anxiety that had crept into his thoughts was driving him onwards, and soon he was turning down his street. The excitement was not in vain. Directly opposite the gate stood an unfamiliar car. So much for doing a good deed. It seems that my house has been trashed to the full. They've also brought a car. Why did they limit themselves to a car, he thought. There was no one in the car, and the man entered the yard with some apprehension. He approached the door and froze, not knowing whether to call the police or try to check what was going on his own. He listened, heard nothing, and finally pulled the doorknob towards him. There was no one on the spacious veranda, which served as a hallway and a winter refrigerator, and in the heat of summer could be used as a bedroom. David went on, and in the living quarters an unexpected surprise awaited him. At the table, in addition to the mourning stranger and the baby, was a person he knew very well, Vivian's ex-wife. She was sitting half-turned towards the door, and even with a fleeting glance he could see that she was still beautiful. Besides, as always, Vivian was not a stranger to words. "Well, hello, David. I see you've been working hard. You were quick to replace me." "And who?" Surprised man, by experience of years lived together, understood that his former wife, asking a rhetorical question, only to, after a theatrical pause, to insult the fallen stranger, using the most unflattering comparisons and epithets. Why did you come here? Didn't you say last time we met that you wanted nothing more to do with me, some pathetic loser? That's why you took everything that was legally yours. And you took a little extra on top of that. You haven't forgotten how you suddenly left me without a business of my own. Let me remind you. You had the nerve to run me around your finger like a little boy. Unscrupulous, took away everything I cared about. And you also have the nerve to come into my house uninvited, demand access to my laptop, and insult the person who is preventing you. The man was saying everything that was on his heart. But Vivian could not be embarrassed by the accusations. She acted like the mistress of the situation, and as if she was telling off her ex-husband. I'm not even going to justify myself. I needed the information that's on your laptop, for the sake of decency, even though I didn't have to. But I tried to call you. Only apparently you're very touchy and you've blacklisted my number. So I had to come to you in person. Everything would have been fine. I wouldn't have even caught your eye. Suddenly this girl meets me. Vivian, following her cavalier manner, did not hesitate to talk about the stranger as if she were not sitting in the same room, but was an empty seat. Lord, when did your taste go bad, David? What have you become indiscriminate about? I can't believe who you picked, and with a little something extra. I don't recognize you. You should have heard the way she talked to me. Honestly, worse than a chain dog. She said she'd never let me near the laptop and told me to wait for your permission when you got home. I begged her nicely to call you, but she didn't have a phone, not even a button phone. David, Vivian said, why don't you give your flatmate a simple one? It's petty of you. Yeah, well, it's up to you. Anyway, I'm in a hurry. So let me just get the information I need and leave this inhospitable house. David, who had got used to the inconsiderateness of his ex-wife, was not even going to indulge her next whim, and smiling, said, Vivian, you're so cheeky. Not only that, from my usual life left no stone unturned, but also, it turns out, not everything was taken from the memory of the laptop. Honestly, your version of the story doesn't work. You know exactly how to find me. It's enough to type my surname and first name into any browser search engine, and my new job, contacts, phone number, and even my email will appear on the screen. So I'm sorry, but I don't believe you one bit. As far as I remember, you've always been characterized by hypertrophied pragmatism, and you're not inclined to do anything unnecessary. And suddenly, in this weather, you suddenly need some files. It's a load of bollocks. But I understand perfectly well that you have enough meanness to bring viruses, just so, out of malice, or as revenge for the fact that I did not disappear without you. Anyway, I'm already tired of communicating with you. Write what files you're interested in, and I'll email them to you. Bye now. David flashed his beautiful blue eyes, and his ex-wife realized that the suggestion she had conceived of a sneaky prank was not far from the truth. Vivian rose from her chair, nearly knocking it over, and already approaching the door, she hissed, I need the contents of the folder from our last holiday together. David grinned. Do you really think I've carefully saved them and revisit them in moments of sadness? By the way, Vivian, give me the keys. I don't want any surprises in your face. The woman gracefully opened her clutch and, expressing her indignation at the failed visit to her ex-husband, threw the keys on the floor. Big deal, he didn't need surprises. He was a loser, and he was still a loser. No idea where you live, no idea who you live with. At least I had the sense to stay awake. I just don't know how long it'll last. Having finished her speech with a rhetorical question, Vivian left the room and slammed the door so loudly that the little guest even flinched. The stranger began to soothe the boy who looked so much like herself, stroking his back. Then she stood up and pulled him behind her, explaining, Thank you so much. We've warmed up, rested, and will probably go on. We won't disturb you. David wondered. Excuse me, but didn't you say this morning that you lived in another city? Did you decide to walk? I'm afraid that's not very sensible. The roads aren't much better now, and it's an adventure to cover 1,000 kilometers. If you were frightened by my ex-wife's visit and unwittingly witnessed this ugly scene, I apologize. I honestly didn't realize you'd be unwittingly working as a security guard. Thank you, you're very brave, because my ex-wife, when she's angry, there's not many people who can stand up to her. Well, you've learned that already. The stranger smiled shyly. I just didn't know what to do, but I was afraid to take charge of someone else's house, probably more out of fear than courage. David removed his outer garment and, praising the stranger for her vigilance, offered, "As a token of my gratitude for guarding my property, I feel it is my duty to feed you. It is true that my food is scarce here, but fortunately there is a delivery service that will easily solve this problem. What kind of cuisine do you prefer? And what should the boy order? By the way, let's get to know each other. My name is David." The girl, on whose face the surgeon would not have noticed the intervention of plastic, introduced herself and the boy. "I'm Angelina, and this is Michael." The boy, who was watching the adults, heard his name and gave David his palm. The man gently shook the child's fingers and said, "Well, the formalities are over. Now let's decide what to eat." Angelina generally suggested frying potatoes from a few tubers she saw in the fridge, but David rejected that idea. "No, I consider it my duty to show hospitality, so let's go without ceremony. I'm not promising restaurant food if I order ready to eat. So what would you like right now?" The girl was silent, embarrassed. Michael, on the other hand, shouted happily, "I'd like a hamburger and a pizza, and fries and a milkshake." An outraged Angelina tried to restrain the child, urging him to behave more modestly and to remember that such food is not entirely healthy. But David supported Michael. "Sometimes it's okay to indulge in something like this, and in order to have a full diet, we'll order something hot from the cafe and take some cakes for tea." Despite the transport collapse, the delivery didn't have to wait long, and soon the food on the table looked quite appetizing. The taste didn't disappoint either. Michael greedily devoured the food, almost unresponsive to Angelina's attempts to pull him back. "Take your time, please. I don't want you to choke on it." David was mentally glad he hadn't let his recent acquaintances leave. Angelina had obviously not decided to take over the kitchen before he arrived, or else she'd been thwarted by Vivian's intrusion. Whatever the case, the boy was hungry. Soon Michael was satiated, and he was slowly deciding which cake to eat next. Angelina was tense, but she ate with gusto and didn't seem to be thinking about calories or proper nutrition. David noticed that the boy was bored and began to turn his head round. "Michael, do you want me to play cartoons on my laptop?" he suggested. The boy agreed, and soon from the sofa on which he had settled down came the cheerful sounds of a song from the animated series Puppy Patrol. "That your son likes dogs?" David clarified. Angelina nodded. "He loves them. Only Michael is not my son. A brother, a sibling." Taking advantage of the fact that the boy seemed to be completely immersed in the adventures of cartoon characters, David inquired. "The case, of course, is not mine. If you don't answer, I understand. But I have a question," David began. "How did you and your brother end up outside in this weather? I'm sorry, but you and he don't look like homeless people. Except you're not exactly dressed for the weather. Modest, really, and not out of necessity." Angelina was strikingly different from David's ex-wife and from the arrogant visitors to his clinic, with whom he had just recently parted. The girl sighed sadly. It was hard for her to remember the sad story that had caused her to get into a mess that could have ended badly if it hadn't been for the kindness of her new acquaintance. Angelina decided that David had a right to know everything that had happened to her and Michael. Making sure her brother was completely engrossed in the cartoons, she began to narrate softly. "Anyway, the story is probably not very interesting. At least I wish it hadn't happened to me. But as it happened, it's still hard and painful for me to tell. When I was 10 years old, my mom died. An accident. Just because it wasn't anyone's fault didn't make it any easier. So I lived with my dad under the care of my grandparents. 5 years later, Dad married Vanessa. Stepmother at the beginning of family life successfully concealed that she married not for love at all, but solely out of calculation. Even I believed her affectionate words and her supposed interest in my teenage problems. so I can't blame Dad for his gullibility. Moreover, after a few years of marriage, Vanessa, as I understand, tried to give birth to a child more firmly bind to herself unloved man, or, as it became clear later, to tear off from my father a bigger piece. Only one thing she did not take into account: the boy was born with a hairlip. In general, the ideal pictures of a happy family with a beautiful heir, beautiful wife, adoring stepdaughter did not turn out. Vanessa had my deepest respect. She kept the mark of an impeccable and dedicated mother and rushed Michael to hospitals. He was successfully operated on at an early age. Now only the scar was a reminder of those times. And his stepmother mentioned that he could have plastic surgery later. And no one would ever realize the boy had such a problem. My father literally idolized his wife. In his opinion, she had passed the ordeal of a sick child with honor and therefore deserved boundless trust. Knowing about his heart problems, Dad signed over almost all of his property to Vanessa. No, he didn't hurt me either. Our old flat, which he bought before the new marriage, went to me as a gift. But my stepmother became a wealthy woman. Not crazy rich, but well-to-do. I don't know how long my father's marriage to Vanessa would have lasted, but one day she just disappeared from the house. Michael was at the daycare center that day on a field trip. It was a good facility. He attended a private kindergarten, and their groups were taken to plays and museums of interest to the children. Vanessa told my father she was going as a chaperone. There was nothing strange about that either. She didn't work and often took part in the kindergarten trips. Anyway, my dad got a call from the kindergarten teacher in the evening and tactfully asked when someone was coming to pick up Michael. It was a real shock. My father was sure that Vanessa and her son had gone to continue the entertainment program after the excursion. My stepmother's phone was unavailable. I went to go get Michael, and when he and I got home, my father was holding onto his heart. When I started asking what had happened, I didn't get an answer right away and didn't push for clarification. Dad asked to feed the little boy. While the boy was engrossed in his food, we went into the next room and Dad informed me that Vanessa had called to say she had left the family. We had to call an ambulance that evening. Dad was hospitalized, despite his attempts to stay calm. I stayed with Michael. We were scared, confused, and didn't know what to do. When I got Vanessa on the phone, I heard that she wasn't going home. You see, she had finally found true love and needed to move forward. Her son seemed superfluous to Vanessa's journey. She wasn't even going to bring her new man into the house. Dad was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks, but his condition was deplorable. It was as if he didn't care about anything about the business, which was almost all Vanessa's, about me, and about his little son. Vanessa's betrayal was too deep a wound. As a result, 7 months ago, Dad passed away. I have Michael in my arms, to whom I am very attached. He's my family. I also feel incredibly sorry for him. He's already had to deal with his mother's betrayal at such an early age. Vanessa took me aside at the funeral and told me that she would make sure that most of the inheritance would go to me and her son if I would take care of Michael. Since I was of legal age, my stepmother even somehow got me a document that I could officially represent my brother's interests. I agreed. But the stepmother did not keep her inheritance promise. In fact, my brother and I had only my flat, because Vanessa was powerless to put her greedy manicured fingers on it. I spent money to sort out the intricacies of the law and take from Vanessa what we are due. But it was all for nothing. No one could legally help me. They offered to buy out my stepmother's share so that the flat would become mine and Michael's. Only there was no way to do it, nothing to do it with. Suddenly, my account, which I had opened with my dad, mysteriously had no money at all. The bank wrote that I had allegedly come and withdrawn the entire amount myself. The police wouldn't listen to me. So I came up with the idea to rush here for help in the city where my dad's old friend lives, because I couldn't get in touch with him on his mobile phone. I couldn't find him on social media either. I took a week off work, picked Michael up from daycare. Now you realize it was a stupid gamble. I didn't even think to tell anyone where I was going or why. Even if someone did miss us, they wouldn't think to look for us right away. Anyway, when we got here, things didn't go as I'd planned. No one had heard from the address written down the old-fashioned way in my dad's notebook for Jacob, after whom my brother was named. Anyway, outside the train station, I didn't realize how I had fallen victim to a con artist. I remember her asking me for directions to the shopping center. Michael and I were walking towards the station, so I started explaining. This con artist said I had a good heart and she could help me solve all my problems. She said it was especially important to remove the negative program from the boy, and the sooner the better. Otherwise he might get worse old health problems. All I had to do with her help was to perform a cleansing ritual. I don't know why I fell for it. It was like I was hypnotized. Maybe she caught me worrying about my brother. I came to when Michael pulled me to the bench. He told me later that I had put my wallet with money and cards, my smartphone, both mine and his passports, into the bag that the con artist had handed me. She rolled it up, tied it with red thread, and handed it to me, ordering me to open an account up to $1,000 afterwards. Inside, as you realize, there was nothing. Just some old t-shirt. At the police station, where I rushed, they listened to me and advised me to stop believing in fairy tales. They only accepted a statement about the loss of passports and said they couldn't help with the fraud. I asked them to send us to our city, but they explained to me clearly that they have no opportunity to help all trusting people. They said that there are a lot of us. No funds would be enough to send everyone home. With the current address of my dad's friend also could not help, and most likely just did not want to bother. It's not the rarest combination of first and last name. That's how it turned out that my brother and I were in an almost hopeless situation. Well, I had a thermos in my traveling bag, a change of underwear, and Michael had some money in his pocket, some tickets. Unfortunately, there was not much money left, but I never gave up hope of borrowing from kind people. I nearly got beaten up once. Professional beggars from the station area and their patrons. And then it wasn't very interesting. We slept in entrances until 2 o'clock in the morning. We got lucky in one of them. There was a sofa on the landing in front of the stairs to the roof. It was at least soft to sleep on. My brother and I tried not to make any noise and were as quiet as mice. Today we decided to go for a morning walk in the private sector. I think people can be simpler and more trusting here, and luckily you noticed us and helped us. David was shocked. Of course, he had heard stories about hypnosis, by means of which crooks deceive people, but he thought that only people lacking in intelligence fall for the tricks of criminals. However, this turned out to be far from the case. Judging by the manner of conversation and choice of words, Angelina was educated, but still managed to succumb to the influence of fraudsters. The man, of course, had his doubts about whether the story Angelina had told him was true, but she, as if she understood his thoughts, suddenly asked, "Can you pause the cartoon for a moment?" After the boy fulfilled his sister's request, she typed in the search box the name of a popular social network, and typing his first and last name, chose one profile from the list that fell out. And soon Angelina's photo appeared on the screen. "If necessary, I'll log into my account," the girl offered. I remember the password perfectly. It's my brother's name and his date of birth. I won't forget it, so I will be able to prove to you that this is exactly my page, said Angelina. David, however, refused. No need for that. I believe you have no particular reason to cheat. Anyway, Angelina, let's do it this way. You'll stay at my place and I'll take you home at the weekend. I have business in your town, so I'll combine work with good deeds. Maybe someday it'll count for something. We'll spend the remaining 2 days making sure no loans have been made on your passport. We'll also look for your father's friend. He can't have gone missing somewhere, David continued. The man noticed that the girl almost jumped for joy, but aloud she said, "I'm sorry, but I'm very embarrassed to embarrass you, and even more embarrassed to make you solve my problems. I find it uncomfortable." David even became amused. "You mean it's more comfortable to sleep in the entryway with a small child? Honestly, that's unreasonable. Of course, I can pay for a long-distance taxi to take you home, but judging by the information on the internet, the traffic jams in your city are 10 points. And the situation on the motorway is hardly much better. It's still snowing, and if you believe the forecast, it will be snowing tomorrow. In my opinion, it is better not to go on the road in such weather, especially not with a small child. I don't know what will happen on the road, snow drifts, traffic jams, and so on." Angelina listened to David's opinion, especially since he voiced an acceptable option for overnight accommodation. "I have a lovely, comfortable cot. And for you and Michael, I will divorce the couch," The unexpected meeting with his ex-wife had taken a lot of energy from David, and he really wanted to sleep. The whole day had been exhausting. He went to get a cot and a mattress, which he kept on the veranda so that he would not be exposed to the cold that could penetrate even a blanket thrown on the mattress until bedtime. David gave Angelina a set of bed linen. He unfolded the sofa, and the girl quickly organized the bed. Michael washed his face and put on his landlord's t-shirt instead of his pajamas. With undisguised pleasure, he snuggled under the blanket, and saying good night to everyone, fell asleep almost instantly. The adults followed suit, but it wasn't the sound of the alarm clock going off that pulled David out of his sweet slumber, but Angelina's anxious whisper. "Wake up, please." The girl shook him lightly by the shoulder. "Hurry up. I'm sorry, but I thought there was some noise in the courtyard. I can smell smoke now. I looked out on the veranda. There was something burning in the yard." The owner jumped up and, grabbing the fire extinguisher by the door, rushed to the wooden garage. Fortunately, because of the snow, the fire had not had time to develop into a full blaze and was extinguished by the onslaught of foam. David had little doubt that the arson had been set by his ex-wife. Of course, Vivian hadn't set the fire herself, it wasn't the king's business. But hiring someone from the marginalized elements to commit the crime was quite her style. The fire didn't do much damage, but that was just a happy coincidence. Another time, the perpetrators might succeed, and it would be nice if there were no casualties. Today, they are unlikely to attempt to damage property again. But there's no guarantee that the stylish ex-wife will rest easy on this one. David and Angelina, who had jumped out after him to fight the fire and scaling the wall next to the hearth of the blaze, grabbing a shovel that caught her eye, returned to the house. Michael, exhausted from his wanderings, continued to sleep serenely, but the adults were not concerned. They settled into the small living room, and David noted with surprise, "Angelina, now you've become my savior for the second time. If you hadn't woken up, the garage would probably have gradually burst into flames and the damage would have been extensive. Thank you." The girl sat up, modestly dimming her eyes, and timidly said, "I did nothing of the sort, really. In fact, it's you I'm most grateful to. At least Michael is sleeping properly, in human conditions, and not like a miserable homeless man." David, having poured tea for himself and his guest, began to share unhappy suspicions. "It must be Vivian who's freaking out. She's angry that she didn't get what she wanted at the snap of her fingers. So she's showing me she's not to be messed with. And it's not like she's punishing me. She knows perfectly well that the plot and everything on it doesn't belong to me. My sister, with her husband and children, used to live here when they moved to another city, where my brother-in-law was invited to work on a long-term contract. I was offered to live here. At that time, I was in the process of divorce and property division, so I grasped the offer with both hands. In fact, it was impossible to think of a better option. It's not even that my sister's family absolutely refused to charge me for rent. It's just that here, in this house, I am calm and good. There are facilities, it's not far to work, and in general, everything was fine. Until I was convinced today that the territory is completely unprotected from the invasion of unkind people. We should probably put up video cameras, and soon. I'll get on it first thing tomorrow morning." Angelina, whose sleep had drifted away after the recent incident, listened attentively to the man. She didn't interrupt him with unnecessary comments. She couldn't even listen carefully. That was the only thing she could do to help him at least a little. It was important to the girl to express her gratitude to David. He, like many others, did not pass by without knowing anything, was not afraid to shelter her and her brother in the most difficult life situation, realizing that Angelina and the boy could not be safe in his house now. David decided to back up and called the police squad about the attempted arson. At least such an act should cool the hot-headed intruders down a bit. Although it certainly didn't guarantee that the arson wouldn't happen again. After sending Angelina to bed, the man waited for the police to arrive. To his great surprise, the patrol arrived only half an hour later. It took about the same amount of time, or a little longer, to interview him and draw up the necessary documents. David explained his suspicions about his ex-wife and, having been advised by the policeman to install video cameras, accompanied the officers. As he fell asleep, the man thought about the fact that there were still 2 more days until the weekend when he had to go to Angelina and Michael's hometown, and he needed to think about how to ensure their safety until the time of departure. Tomorrow is probably the safest time to leave them in the house. It's unlikely that Vivian or the men she's hired will dare to repeat an arson attack in broad daylight. Bringing Angelina and Michael to the clinic was not an option David had considered. Although there was room for visitors, it would hardly be right. There was nothing for a boy to look at suffering animals and all the time sitting in the lounge boring. And his colleagues might not like the presence of outsiders in the holy of holies of the clinic. Then the thought struck David that through Edward, who had connections in almost every field, he could get the contacts of the video equipment specialists and someone from the police to get the search for her injured father's mate moving and to resolve her paperwork. Of course, he will have to listen to a lecture from his friend about gullibility, but he will tell the phone numbers of people who can really help unravel the tangle of problems. In the morning, David got up a few minutes before the alarm went off on his smartphone and found Angelina tidily tending to the kitchen. There was already porridge boiling in the jug of grits that the host had even forgotten about, and the kettle was about to boil. It was pleasant and unexpected. Michael was still asleep, and the man quietly told about what he had thought up. While the host was eating breakfast, the guest wrote down her details, information about her father's friend, and what other things the hypnotist had tricked her into doing. It had been a long shift, and it wasn't until lunchtime that he was able to talk to Edward in peace. As David had expected, his friend had laughed at first. "I didn't realize you were such a good Samaritan. You've got the urge to help someone out. I thought you were talking hypothetically yesterday. Well, it turns out it's pretty clear. But now that you volunteered to help, you've got to move forward to a happy ending. As animal rights activists like to say, referring to the French writer, we are responsible for those we tame. I'll call the people who can help your Angelina." After a short phone call, Edward took a picture of a piece of paper with information written in Angelina's neat handwriting. He sent that image to someone and then contacted someone who could set up video surveillance quickly. "Actually, that would be good. But I'll just be 1 minute," Edward asked the invisible interlocutor and turned to David. "The experts could be here in an hour to set up the cameras. Do you trust Angelina to meet them, or are you going to have to go yourself? Or is it better to postpone it until the evening, or even the weekend?" David regretted that he hadn't thought about the possibility of a quick connection with his guest and thought about it, but Edward helped him out again. "Anyway, I'll run to you myself. I don't think I have any visitors at the clinic, and I'll run back and forth. I have to warn Angelina. She'll freak out if strangers break in." With his hand off the speaker, he approved the time. "Great, come on over. Write down this phone number just in case you forget it or something." "Thank you, Edward. I am forever in your debt." Edward smiled. "Don't worry. I'll be sure to remember it to you." After telling Barbara that he would be gone for a while, Edward raced to the house he knew so well. Angelina greeted him warily. However, Edward introduced himself and showed her not only the photos he had taken with David, of which there were many on his smartphone, but also dialed his friend's number and allowed him to explain everything to her personally. The guest calmed down. Having clarified everything, the girl relaxed and returned to her brother. Edward, having met the specialists, explained the task to them and, getting ready to leave, encouraged Angelina. "Don't worry, the guys are reliable and strong. And while they are here installing the equipment, it is unlikely that any of the ill-wishers will dare to come here in their presence. Competent people are already dealing with your documents too. So everything will be fine." "Thank you so much," she said sincerely. But Edward shrugged. "You're the one who was lucky enough to get in David's way. To be honest, I wouldn't have thought it would have occurred to me to trust a stranger to give me the keys to my own place. Although seeing you, it's impossible to suspect anything untoward. Right, well, I'm off. Good luck to you." Angelina tried to keep Michael entertained until his master returned, keeping him entertained with cartoons and simple games. However, the boy wanted to be home sooner, to play with his favorite robots, and the girl mentally scolded herself for the reckless decision to drag her brother to another city. Why had she thought it would be a simple pleasure trip, the height of frivolity? Angelina was now deeply ashamed of herself. But on the other hand, who would she leave Michael with? The neighbor would hardly agree to leave her brother, for example. In a 24-hour daycare center, it was utopia. Calming herself with the fact that she simply had no alternative, the girl automatically began to clean the house where David had taken them in. She dusted, mopped the floors, fed Michael, who tried to demand pizza but was refused. She gave him tea and sweets left over from last night's feast. She herself, because of the excitement, didn't want to eat. In the evening, David returned home not alone, but in the company of Edward. He, like his friend, was carrying bulky bags with the supermarket logo on them. In the company of Michael, who was curious about how CCTV worked, they checked how the cameras reacted to movement and were quite satisfied. Grabbing a screwdriver and an unknowingly purchased CCTV warning sign, the men set off to install it on the fence, leaving Angelina to deal with the groceries they had brought in. By the time the friends and Michael, who had joined them, returned to the house, the girl, of course, had not yet had time to prepare anything, but no one resented it. Everyone agreed to wait until the pilaf was ready, and before it was served to satisfy their hunger with a snack of sandwiches with sausage. Not very healthy, but tasty. Edward justified the meal and took a big bite. David and Michael followed suit. Angelina was happy to see her brother's ruddy, satisfied face, and sad. The boy lacked the companionship of a man, and this need she could not compensate. Frankly speaking, Vanessa's indifference, who cut her son out of her life, caused him a huge trauma. So Angelina tried her best to distract Michael from this pain. Of course, not much time had passed, but the girl hoped that she was able to at least partially replace her brother's entire family. Now it was obvious to her that the baby was drawn to these young men with kind hearts. Very entertaining. Her beloved Kyle, with whom they'd even talked about marriage, had been so limited to empty phrases like "hi bye" and "how are you?" In addition, soon after the brother was in the care of Angelina, such a relationship began to rapidly deteriorate. Kyle announced that they were breaking up by sending a text message. "Well, screw him," the girl interrupted her sad musings. "It's even good that he had the courage to end this affair before it would have been too painful." It wasn't that she wasn't suffering, but her brother's worries and work kept her from slipping into despair. Angelina's dinner wasn't finished when Edward's phone rang. He took the call and was soon dictating David's address to someone, and then, pressing off, he explained. "There, I told you everything was going to be all right." Jacob had been found and was on his way here. Angelina noticed his posture, his figure, military-like but clearly retired in age. He hadn't shown up at David's house empty-handed. After introductions to Edward and David, he listened to the girl's story and gave her a gentle reprimand. Yes, as they say, courage and stupidity went hand in hand to go to this wilderness. Even without an exact address, it was reckless. It was good that I had just moved, not on a long-term business trip abroad, and they managed to find me. Well, no need to scold if everything seems to have turned out all right, thanks to the people who cared. He nodded at Edward and David. Real men. Angelina and Michael, of course, I'm inviting them to my flat with me. My wife is already setting the table there, preparing to welcome our dear friend's children. May he rest in peace. She's not a stupid woman, and we'll figure out how best to handle things together. Edward interjected into Jacob's monologue. In general, Angelina's documents and bank cards are already being processed. The man voiced the incomplete details of his mate, who was helping to resolve the issues. And suddenly it turned out that this was the person Jacob wanted to contact too. Not a city, but a small village. It's an amazing coincidence, David said. Angelina, my offer to drive you and Michael back to your hometown still stands. I shall indeed have to go there, so don't refuse. And you can spend the time before you leave here, if it's more convenient for you. Angelina was uncomfortable with the man who had given her and her brother a temporary home. So she replied, I think Michael and I will probably go to Jacob's. I think it would be more appropriate. David had no choice but to agree with his guest's decision. While Jacob waited for his longtime friend's daughter and son to gather, he exchanged phone numbers with the landlord and Edward, asking, Me, if you guys need anything, call me. I'm not saying I'm omnipotent, but I can solve a lot of problems with minimal effort, while staying within the legal framework, without any distortions into criminality. I'm Angelina and Michael, don't worry, I owe their father a lot. So they'll be at home in my flat, Jacob assured them. David reminded him, Tomorrow night I'll let you know what time I'll pick up Angelina and Michael on Saturday. As they made the appointment, Everyone was once again surprised by an unexpected fact. It turned out that Jacob lived only a 15-minute walk from David. Jacob, noticing that his friend's children had already gathered, nodded kindly. All in all, it was nice to meet decent people. Nowadays, kind-heartedness was a quality only found in the Red Book. Thanking David and Edward for their help, the girl and her brother left the house, accompanied by her father's friend. "Yes, David is good," Edward said. "This Angelina is like heaven and earth, ice and fire, compared to your Vivienne. I'm surprised that she even managed to siege your ex-wife and deny her access to the laptop. Although, of course, you did something inconsiderate." David shrugged. "I didn't realize how it happened. You know that sentimentality is not my strong suit. As an excuse, I can say that I didn't sleep well, and even then I had a nightmare. It all worked out well, though." Edward suggested it. "Listen, let me come with you to this town." "So what? We'll go for a drive, have a good time. I'm tired of work and home. I'm tired of it. I need a little change of scenery. Besides, I can always take your place behind the wheel." David had no reason to refuse his friend, especially as they'd have more fun on the way back. On Saturday, at the agreed time, they were waiting at Jacob's driveway for Angelina and her brother Michael. On the trip, the travelers felt as if they were under someone's invisible protection. The roads had already been cleared. There were no traffic jams or accidents to mar the journey. And soon the girl was opening the door of her flat with her miraculously preserved keys. Michael rushed to his room to show off his favorite toys to his new acquaintance. But David refused the coffee. "I'm sorry, Angelina, but if you'll excuse me, I'll take care of my business first, and then I'll be happy to." Edward, however, was in no hurry to leave, explaining to his friend, "Look, I think I'll stay to appreciate Michael's collection. Then, if Angelina will let us, we can play a game of console. I haven't used a joystick in ages." "What, 100 years?" The boy was amazed to hear his friends talking. Everyone laughed, and Angelina explained to her brother. "No, Michael, it is so simply said, exaggerated, to make it clear that a person has not done something for a long time." David left to meet with the owner of the local clinic. He had been thinking about moving for a long time, but so far it was only in the plans. He was in no hurry to share the news, even with his best friend. The surgeon himself was not yet sure that he would leave his hometown and everything that is associated with it behind. But since he didn't want to see, or even accidentally cross paths with the vengeful Vivienne, his resolve was strengthened. Maybe at least this way it would be possible to completely get out from under the blow of his son-in-law's property, and in general to calm down this restless woman. Negotiations with a potential employer had gone much more successfully than he had expected. David was offered to give 3 months, so that he had time to finalize matters in the old clinic, and with a clean heart to begin operations at the new place. The employer said, "Anyway, I'll be expecting a definite answer by New Year's Eve. Will you come to work for me or not? If yes, in March. You're welcome." David, back in Angelina's flat, was thoughtful and quiet. He had a difficult choice to make. He didn't have to be part of the conversation, though. Edward was so full of witticisms that he seemed to have won over little Michael, who was almost looking him in the mouth. The girl had a good strategic stockpile at home, and the table was laden with tasty dishes. Angelina had even managed to boil chicken soup, and now she watched with amusement as her brother, trying to imitate his older comrades, tossed croutons into a plate, then scooped them up with a spoon and sent them into his mouth. Seeing the people who had helped her out, Angelina made a note of their contacts and promised to keep them updated on how things were going with the recovery of her lost passport and SIM card. The weeks leading up to New Year's Eve and the days after the holiday at the vet's clinic saw an endless stream of visitors. As David had expected, some days there was no time to sit quietly and chat with a friend in the lounge. In one of the rare pauses, the surgeon told his friend, "You know, Angelina called me and told me that her passport has been restored. They've issued new cards. She's got her phone back. She said happy holidays. She sends her love to you. And Michael." "Did she invite you to visit?" Edward asked. He glowed and confessed, "I'm very pleased that things are getting better for her. I'm sure she'll work things out with her stepmother in time." Jacob is a man of his word, I gather, and he'll do his best to help his friend's children. He's a good man. I saw him the day before yesterday, and we had a little chat at a mutual friend's place. By the way, you know what the best part is? The woman with the cat you were picking up from the window the other day turned out to be his lawful wedded wife. They have different surnames because Mrs. Maggie didn't want to bother with all the paperwork. That was the zigzag of fate. The conversation between the friends continued unexpectedly when Jacob and his wife came up to David as he was leaving the clinic after the end of the working day. They almost chorally thanked him for saving their cat. After words expressing his gratitude, the man told the surgeon, "Actually, I'm not only thanking you, but I have some not-so-good news. We found the people who tried to set fire to your garage. Our hunch was right. It was your ex-wife who organized the whole thing. Her fate is now in your hands. You have the right to punish her for this act, forgive her, or settle with compensation. I'll put you in touch with a great lawyer if you need one. He is so good that after talking to him, your ex-spouse will be afraid to even think badly of you." David didn't refuse the proposed contact. Indeed, why should he worry about the fate of Vivian, who for some reason decided to organize arson? The way the situation developed further left the man almost enthralled. Vivian, quiet, calm, appeared in the clinic premises and asked, "How would I like to communicate with David?" Following the pattern of communication with visitors, the receptionist asked, "Who are you here with? Breed, age, sex?" The surgeon's ex-wife almost forgot that she wanted to maintain the image of a calm woman, and loudly, irritably blurted out, "I just need to have a word with David. I didn't come here without an animal at all." The abrupt speech made even the nervous little dog waiting for a therapist's appointment flinch. Barbara explained to the visitor that the surgeon was currently resting after an operation. But David, hearing the familiar voice in the waiting room, was in a hurry to resolve the situation, for Vivian could have made a scandal out of nothing. "Hello," he said. "Let's step aside, and you can tell me why you're here." In fact, David knew perfectly well that Vivian was afraid of talking to a lawyer and had come to try to avoid responsibility. Fortunately, he and the specialist recommended by Jacob had considered that option and had clearly explained to his ex-wife what was required of her, so that the law enforcement agencies would have no unpleasant questions for her. Although the woman looked at him languidly and generally tried to flirt with David, he did not give in to the tricks and made her write a receipt, the text of which was stored in his smartphone. This document had no special legal force, but the lawyer, as if looking into the water, said that this paper would cool down the ardor of the inadequate ex. And so it did. When Vivian left the clinic, she even seemed to become smaller in stature. Curious Barbara asked in a whisper, so as not to arouse the interest of the visitors, "David, is this woman no longer allowed to see you, may I? Don't think I'm shorter and weaker than she is." The surgeon smiled at the naive way of coquetry and replied softly in the tone of the receptionist, "Don't worry, Barbara. She certainly won't show her face here again. Thanks to the help of Angelina's acquaintance, a lot of issues were resolved." Not to bother Edward, who himself seemed to be avoiding contact with his friend lately. So the son-in-law's house, after prior agreement with him, was taken under guard by an immediate response team. All that remained was to inform the owner of the clinic of his decision to change his place of residence and work. The conversation was even more difficult than some surgery. But David got through it too. After all, by and large, in his hometown he had nothing to hold him, and where he planned to move to, Angelina lived. The man really liked this girl, and he decided that he would definitely try to start a romantic relationship with her. The news that from the first spring month David will not work in the clinic and prepare for the move and employment in a new place almost instantly became known to the entire staff. They wished the surgeon good luck in his new position. Edward, unusually stern, shared the unexpected information with David. "It's probably only fair that you be the first to know about the significant changes in my life. Anyway, Angelina and I have decided to get married. So if you get a chance, put in a good word with your new boss." David didn't see this coming. He hadn't realized that Edward hadn't just started talking to Angelina, but that they were also in mutual sympathy. He wasn't going to stand in his friend's way, though. Beautiful girls, even under the most extraordinary circumstances, can meet a huge number. True friendship is always worth its weight in gold. so David was genuinely pleased. Well, that's great. I'm happy for you. Love and advice, as they say. So we'll move in together? That's great. At the new clinic, the radiologist's position was filled, but Edward wasn't upset. He had enough to worry about in preparing for the gala and dealing with Angelina's stepmother. Thanks to Jacob's help, Vanessa had managed to find him and force him to make an honest transfer of the money left by her husband. The woman, to Angelina's surprise, did not even try to fight. And in general, her behavior was completely different from her former self. When all the formalities were over, she asked, "Angelina, I know I am very guilty before the child and you. Maybe you'll let me see him once in a while, even if it's in your presence. It doesn't matter what other witnesses, but I want to be with my son. He's all I have left." Angelina was shocked. She'd never seen her staunch stepmother cry before. She hadn't shed a tear even during the preparation for and during the surgery. Now it was as if drops were rolling from her eyes. Angelina shrugged her shoulders in confusion. "Why not? Come home and hang out with Michael. He's your son, and I have no right to deny him the opportunity to see you. Michael never talks about his emotions, but I can sense that he misses me and longs to meet me." The boy was indeed happy to see his mum again. There wasn't an ounce of resentment towards her in his heart, only an endless longing. Angelina offered her stepmother to take the former room, and the woman, repeating words of gratitude, agreed. Of course, she realized that the stepdaughter was doing this out of love for her son, not for her. But it wasn't that big of a deal. At Edward and Angelina's wedding, David was sad. But he was taken care of by Jill, the cheerful maid of honor of the dazzlingly happy bride. She dragged him out to dance, to participate in contests. And the surgeon even got the feeling that he had fallen in love with this charming, active girl. Whirling with Jill in the center of the banquet hall, he winked at his friend who was leading Angelina in the dance and thought, "It's a good thing I didn't walk past a stranger with a baby." Today, David did something illogical. How many people were happy at once? David had no doubt that he and Jill and Edward and Angelina would work out perfectly. "Don't wait up. I'm getting on with my life." And when he came back a year later, he froze on the spot. "Mummy, Camila, but you don't look happy. Can you hear me? Are you there?" Beatrice's gentle voice from the palm-warmed mobile phone was already alerting over her ear. Yes, I'm sorry, daughter. You know when I'm after work, I can easily get distracted from the conversation." Camila tried to keep her voice calm. "So are Bill, Sam and I coming to your place for New Year's Eve, or do you have other plans? You tell me right away, and I'll quickly rearrange mine, because we're looking for company." "Beatrice, I don't know about Dad's plans," Camila exhaled. "I can only guess that they are serious. He left me, found a beautiful young woman, and announced it almost honestly. They've been serious for a long time. So we're officially divorced. I'm sorry to break the news on New Year's Eve. You know I'm not good at hiding things from you." "Mummy, I'm coming to see you. I'm going to wait for Bill to get home from work so he can be with Sam. Then I'll get a taxi and I'll come over. It's been so long since we've had a chat." "Beatrice, I'm fine. You don't have to go out all night with a 2-year-old because of me. It's not going to make me feel any better." "Mum, that child has a dad who's an adequate, responsible, modern dad. You can fool anyone with your calm voice, but not me. In an hour and a half, you'll definitely be expecting me." Camila listened to 3 quick beeps in the receiver and helplessly tried to smile. She was lucky to have a daughter. Not everyone is so lucky. Camila learned about the difficulties of the transition age only from other people's stories. She had been friends with little Beatrice and continued to be friends with the adult. She also managed to avoid experiencing serious love dramas because of the first Beatrice. There were no dramas at all. Beatrice took her studies seriously. In the second year, Beatrice found a job and managed to combine one with another without much difficulty. And by the end of the institute, saved up for a holiday in Italy, long desired. Of course, and parents added a little. And it happened, as in the song, quite by chance, they took tickets for the neighboring seats at high altitude with her future husband. Bill and Beatrice met on the plane. Venice, Florence, Rome, it was all compressed into a week. 6 months of meetings when they returned home. And then a wedding and the birth of a baby boy in the winter. Camila rejoiced in her role as a caring grandmother and seemed to herself almost perfectly happy. She had always felt so comfortable and at ease in Beatrice and Bill's family, in the midst of their warm love and beautiful, almost wordless understanding of each other. It's good that Beatrice is not repeating my fate, she thought one day on the underground, coming back from her daughter and son-in-law's house, and she was afraid of her own thoughts. What could she possibly be unhappy about? She and Andrew have a perfectly normal life for a couple of years. They do not quarrel, do not even argue on matters of principle, live peacefully. Andrew earns well and knows how to manage money wisely. She is, in general, lucky with her husband, if not to take into account this eternal feeling of recent years that something important is missing. In the very true love that any woman expects to meet. She hadn't been particularly lucky since her youth. She'd just quietly accepted it, because frankly there are plenty of women just like her around, far more than those lucky enough to be truly loved, not for a honeymoon but for life. And until noon yesterday, Camila thought her married life was a success. She put all her heart and energy into her family and didn't consider it a special sacrifice. She herself enjoys taking care of her husband, arranging a cozy house where both of them want to rush from work. Their flat is neither bigger nor cozier in layout than that of friends and good acquaintances. But for holidays, everyone likes to gather at their place. Camila always has everything so well organized. Andrew's mates often showed a joking envy. He seriously took taking care of himself for granted. Could it be any other way? If it could be, it was with them. For the last couple of years, Andrew had been busy building and finishing a country house, devoting all his spare time to it. He wanted not just some country house, but a full-fledged, comfortable dwelling, in which you can live all year round if you want. Camila had no time to go to see the construction site every week, and at first she was very worried about it, but Andrew waved it off. Camila, come on, no one can do everything. You just want to be everywhere. It would be better for everyone if you could manage here, and I could manage there. Camila understood, or she thought she did. He really needs something of his own where only he is master. I've stepped aside, left the affairs of the estate to my husband. Yesterday she had been suddenly unwell at work since the morning before weakness had set in, and her head ached so badly that the pill usual in such cases did not help at all. Apparently she did not look bad at all, because even the chief, whom everyone called for indifference, wheezing and rudeness, looked at her and said, "Camila, sometimes it's better to stay home for a couple of days than to take a fortnight's sick leave afterwards. Go home and rest. You'll start work the day after tomorrow. Won't that affect your salary? I don't want a lot of exhausted employees. I'm not a monster, as some people say." Camila nodded gratefully and went home. How wrong are we sometimes in our judgments about people, especially if they are superiors who are commonly disliked. Camila quietly, trying not even to rustle the bouquet bag, entered the flat. Andrew had arrived at night after a business trip. It is not allowed to disturb his sleep, but Andrew did not sleep. A conversation could be heard from the living room. Judging by the absence of the interlocutor's voice, Andrew was talking on the phone. Camila did not immediately realize that it was her husband speaking. The voice and intonation were unfamiliar. "My sweet sunshine, I'll come today. My old lady is pickling tomatoes after work according to a new recipe. The recipes are new every year, but my wife is old. I'm sorry I'm talking rubbish just to be witty. I'll be honest, I'll tell you soon. I appreciate you, I really do. I'm happy you don't want to celebrate New Year's Eve without me. I'll decide before New Year's Eve. I promise. I swear, my little girl. Don't be a child, understand my situation. It's not easy for me. They're both close to me. That's more than 25 years of my life. We raised a daughter. I'm sorry to part with the familiar, albeit gray, dull. 5 more years and she'll be old, but her life revolves around her family. The pantry's full of things to make. She wants us to have the best of everything. If I leave, she'll be alone. No one to do all this for. That's the daughter and son-in-law she'll be worrying about. No, it's not that I'm comfortable. I don't really care. I don't want to spend my life with my mates just to get away from my boring wife. I need joy, and my joy is you." For some reason, Camila hesitated to switch on the light. The illumination from the entrance falling on the mirror was enough to see this gray, exhausted old woman. That's what she was no rival. There is no one to pity her, and her husband doesn't pity her either. Old, pathetic. If she didn't have a headache, she would run out into the street and just wander around until evening, or until she got control of herself and regained the ability to think clearly. Not even the strength to go down the stairs. She wanted to shut the door quietly. Because of her ridiculous desire to listen to the conversation, Camila did not immediately notice that her husband had gone out into the hallway. Hearing the sound, he said goodbye to the sunshine and approached her. I decided not to pickle the tomatoes if you don't care. Her strength was only enough for this reproach. Camila, maybe it's for the best that you heard everything. I really hate lying to you. Sooner or later I would have had to stop this lying. You're a good man, I'm sorry to you. But there's no point in going on like this. Aha, confirmed Camila indifferently. It's wonderful that at least you recognize your old woman as a human being. Camila, why this poison? Let's be frank. I'm only 53. I'm not ready to sign up to be a grandfather. I have a need for love, and why should I give it up? You and I raised Beatrice, and we haven't had much in common since. You just don't want to see it, clinging to the appearance of marriage like everyone else. If you're willing to look and live like an old lady, that's your right and your choice. Take care of your granddaughter. You have someone to look after. I would have lived like that too, like a lot of people my age. But I was lucky a young, beautiful woman fell in love with me, and I loved her very much. Not everyone is so lucky. It's a new life, a real life. You can't give it up. It's a gift. You see, it's only now, thanks to her, that I realize how miserable I've been. This is my chance to start over. You won't be disadvantaged in any way. You're my daughter's mother. I'm keeping this flat for you. I won't take anything from here except my clothes, my shoes. She and I will live in another house. It's not for nothing that I've invested so much in this place. Apparently, fate has guided you. Don't drive the car and you haven't invested any money in it, so it's logical that it stays with me. I'll give you some money for the first time. We'll discuss the amount. It's called a kickback, Camila commented. What if you ask for a lot? I said we'll discuss it. Andrew repeated patiently. Camila, let's be human. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not going to hang on to you like a dog. I don't need this conversation at all. I came home with a headache. I'm going to take a warm bath. It's working for me. While I'm in the bath, get your stuff together, your papers. What else do you have there? She said thoughtfully. Just so you don't have to come back here for something you forgot, and leave your keys. You'll file for divorce yourself. I don't like to go to the authorities. You know I won't drag it out to spite you. They'll set a date. I'll come at the appointed day and hour, and we'll get divorced. No money. I've got a normal salary, enough for me on my own. Don't show up. I don't want to see you for the last time on the day of the divorce. And since you want to play the noble, you're sharing the flat ceded to Beatrice, so that your love does not disinherit the girl. It's only fair, don't you think? Mum, could you still be thinking of any inheritance of mine? At that moment, Beatrice wondered quietly, listening to her story. Who else would I be thinking of? Daughter Camila shrugged her shoulders, and a shadow of a sad grin ran down her pale cheeks. When such things come upon you, you have to cling to some straw that will keep you from losing interest in life. I'm happy. I have you and Bill. I have Sam. I promise not to overtreat you, not to turn into the annoying old woman your father thinks I am. I've been sitting here thinking. He's right about something. I've always tried to keep him well-fed, warmly clothed, relaxed, cozy. It was like a home service. I thought it was the right thing to do in a family. I didn't realize that's not what he needed. I should have thought more about myself, tried to be charming, and things could have turned out differently. Andrew continued patiently, though it's pointless to speculate about it now. Are you making excuses for him? No, not at all. Beatrice was surprised. To be honest, Mum, you surprise me with this habit of always blaming yourself for everything. It's too much. I haven't told you, but I'll tell you now. Dad and I had a conversation about 3 years ago. Just after New Year's Eve, when he gave you a blender for New Year's Eve. It was a good blender, Camila nodded. It still works now. But it's not a gift, it's just a thing for the house that you buy for no reason when you need it. I suddenly remembered then that for every holiday your father gives you something practical, useful, domestic. That's what I told him. Yes, I did, nicely, politely, you know me. He was so surprised, as if it was the first time he heard that you can give perfume, jewelry, or theater tickets. A visit to a beauty salon, something that would emphasize that he thinks of you as a woman, wants to see you beautiful and satisfied. But Dad didn't hear me. Even Alex took offense at me, saying that I had not yet got rid of my naive, girlish ideas and was telling him how to behave with his own wife. I didn't think much of it at the time. I tried it, and it didn't work. And now it comes back to me. After all, he himself was comfortable that you are so happy blender, multi-cooker. You spend almost no money on self-care. Who needs a beautiful, well-groomed wife? He himself will somehow take care of it. And who just needs a convenient housewife? That's how he behaves. I wish Daddy from the bottom of my heart that his new lassie would spend all his earnings on her incomparable beauty. Beatrice, you even cheer me up. Camila smiled confusedly. I didn't realize I had you so vindictive on men. I just love you dearly and I feel bad for you. You certainly don't deserve this, Beatrice said with a smile. Yes, Mummy, all his friends are jealous that he has such a wonderful mother-in-law. They joke that he married me because of you. Dad is just used to luxurious care, taking it for granted all his life. He'll definitely regret it. You'll see. I don't want him to regret anything. Let him go in peace, replied Camilla. Thank you, Beatrice, my kitten. Don't quarrel with Papa. You're a grown-up, diplomatic person. Do you realize he's still your father? Our divorce is our divorce. It has nothing to do with you. Besides, he's vowed to take care of your inheritance before the divorce. So I'm sure I won't change my mind and drag out the process. Don't worry, Mummy. I won't give up my share either, Beatrice assured her with a smile as she looked into her mother's palm. At least to keep it out of the hands of some calculating person. I admire your self-control. I never realized you were so strong. Tears suddenly sprang from Camila's eyes, as if an invisible dam had burst. Daughter Beatrice. I don't understand myself. I wanted to scream, to beg something like, do not leave me. Let's try to fix everything. I'll forgive everything. Forget everything. Everything will take into account. Only if you stay, that's like the last stupid woman. But something held me back. It was a shame to cry in front of him. You're the one I trust, and I'm crying in front of you. And I am not ashamed. Beatrice got up from her chair, came over and put her arms around her mother, stroking her head, while Camila sobbed and felt herself getting better. Oh, daughter, there's good news, isn't there? She spoke again. I've fallen out of love with him. When I came out of the bathroom, there was no sign of him, and the flat was as clean as it had been. I went into the wardrobe automatically. I needed something to occupy my hands, and there were such neat hollows on the shelves, where his underwear was. Next to it, everything was neatly in its place. Shirts, jackets left with the owner, not crumpled. And in the new house, until they buy hangers, we'll keep things in boxes, Camila continued. The paperwork is spotless too. No mess, as it could be in a hurry, in emotion. The man is thoroughly packing for his new life. Thoughtfully, as I advised him. I suddenly felt so disgusted, ridiculous and disgusting. And I fell out of love with him, just like that. In a moment, really. She said to Beatrice. Mum, I really wish you didn't find it so surprising. It's such a blessing if it's true. You won't waste your time in useless misery, but you'll live your life. You'll see old friends. We'll go to the theater with you. You'll take care of yourself. We'll finally do your hair and makeup, update your wardrobe, and send you on holiday. Celebrate the divorce. Well, isn't that a good idea? Starting a new life, as expected, was easy only in theory, and in practice everything progressed slowly and with difficulty. It suddenly turned out that Camila had a lot of free time on her hands, and no way to spend it was particularly exciting. That's just from confusion on your part, her friend reassured Scarlett. You can't rebuild years of lifestyle in a month. Take your time, it will come. It also turned out that Scarlett was almost her only real friend. Well, at least there's one. That's a lot. Lucky already, Camila thought. It had been so long since she had seen the others. Only exchanged postcards and likes in social networks, and the connection somehow imperceptibly weakened. The girls listened to Camila's news, sympathized out of solidarity, scolded these men and hurried back to their problems. The married ones had some problems, the free ones had others. But it was already someone else's life, no longer intersecting with Camila's. Scarlett had been living alone for several years. Her son had gone to study in the capital and stayed there. She really didn't want to get married after her first marriage had failed. Her husband was a real family tyrant. Scarlett barely got rid of him. He threatened to take his son in case of divorce, taking advantage of his position and connections. And some other threats of violence, Scarlett said, but a fortunate coincidence intervened. This man went to jail, he didn't share it with someone else. How did you explain that fact? Camilla asked. Then I didn't waste any time, got divorced and left with my son to another city as far away as possible. My son went to the same class Beatrice was in. At a parent-teacher conference, we young mums got to know each other. Scarlett really valued her freedom and knew how to manage it. Not beautiful, but charming, friendly, and positive. She was attracted to men and willingly went into relationships, but broke them off without regret when she felt they were trying to dictate something to her. You're so wary. Maybe you feel that way sometimes, Camilla surmised, listening to the reason for yet another breakup. No, I try my best to judge with an open mind. But look, he likes it when a woman wears dresses and heels, and I'm always in jeans and sneakers. I'm not feminine enough. He wants to put me in heels. I tried to joke, let me show my love in some other way without heels and sundresses. Camilla, you know how it is. I really can't stand heels. I like comfortable shoes. I'm not from the 19th century. I run, not swim like a beautiful swan. And I didn't lie to him by dating someone else. And when I met him, I was wearing sneakers. And so answer me this, why would a man want to re-educate me when it's easier to find a woman of his type and not worry? Scarlett, but it could be that the man wants exactly you. But he just has different tastes in clothes, Camilla suggested. You're missing the point. He doesn't really care about my looks, he cares about command. I'm immune to Pygmalions like that for life. It always starts that way. It started that way with my ex-husband, too. It was useless to argue with Scarlett, and I didn't really want to. Maybe Scarlett's right. She knows best. Camilla was far less experienced in relationships, she pondered. She'd married Andrew once when she was young, and she'd never been with another man. Camilla didn't regret it in the slightest, even now. It was quite possible her lack of experience had spared her a lot of disappointment. And how could Scarlett not be afraid to start over every time? Camilla herself certainly wouldn't go into a relationship now. She wouldn't have to. She's too old for that. She met Andrew at an ordinary New Year's disco in an ordinary neighborhood club. She went there for the first time. Her friends dragged her there, and her mum supported them. Really, what to sit at home? No one will come to the house. Mum was worried. Her daughter is well into her 20s, and she hasn't even met anyone. Her Camilla grew up, though not a beauty, but quite a pretty girl. Her waist was slim, her brown hair was thick and slightly curly, and her eyes were honey brown, calm and soft. Camilla was self-conscious about a lot of things. Her round face, it seemed too wide to her, and her cheekbones. Are you picking on yourself too much at all? You can't do that, Mum had argued. The smoke of cigarettes was drifting across the floor. Music was blasting from the speakers when a skinny brunette, very handsome, stylishly dressed, completely sober, unlike many others at this disco, came up to Camilla and asked quite politely, "Shall we dance? My name is Andrew. I haven't seen you here before." Camilla, I don't go to places like this. I just went with the girls to keep them company. How was it? Too many drunk people, not good. I don't think I'll be coming here much. Yeah, me neither. Listen, Camilla, when this party's over, let's go somewhere cozy and sit and chat. I'm inviting you. Let's go. Camilla was confused. She really wanted to get away from here. And the guy seemed serious and pleasant. And no one had ever invited her anywhere but her girlfriends. By the end of the evening, Camilla had learned something about Andrew. He was a young specialist in railway production, some kind of engineering specialty. Not everyone has to keep points on the market. Someone needs to do something serious, complicated and boring, not for pennies, Andrew told her. In a civilized way, he expected to grow up to the head of the company. He was sure that he would succeed. He had his own flat, inherited from his grandfather, but he dreamed of building his own house. He was the only son of a full family. He wasn't too keen on discos either. It was pop, and he listened to rock. He just didn't know why he wanted to see what his ex-girlfriend was doing in those places. Yeah, it was definitely an ex-girlfriend. It was a stupid idea. But I met Camilla. Camilla had little faith that there was any interest in meeting her. She just sat and listened to his story, saying almost nothing herself. But it seemed Andrew just needed to speak up. He walked Camilla home and managed to earn her mom's approval. She liked that the boy wasn't being secretive. He waited for his mother to open the door and handed her Camilla from hand to hand. Well-mannered, and not like these modern-day informals or bullies. The next day after work, Camilla unexpectedly dropped in on her friend Gwen. She always found out everything about everyone first and in detail. It seemed to be the point of Gwen's life. "I was stunned when you ran off with Andrew from the disco last night," Gwen said. "You must know something about him." He'd made the whole show of leaving, with a new girlfriend, for the sake of his Molly, my neighbor, who was being courted by a lot of people, including Alex. Alex was the owner of a pretty decent grocery shop, cafe, and beauty salon for their neighborhood. And to the girls of the early 90s, he seemed like a well-to-do and respectable man. Molly had been having an affair with Andrew for almost 2 years. Why she wanted him, I don't know. For the collection, maybe, to create a halo of popularity. And he was good-looking, you have to admit. But he was really serious. He didn't realize he was one of the many suitors for Molly's attention. And when Andrew started bothering her, she just stopped hiding things from him. Andrew is now stalking her in different places, watching her, probably to annoy her, to make her feel uncomfortable. He's counting on it for nothing, though. Molly is almost impossible to embarrass. She's only amused by the whole thing. "I thought you might be interested," mate Gwen said to Camilla. "Or else all of a sudden you're counting on something with him." Camilla wasn't counting on anything in particular, but she felt very sad for some reason. Whatever Gwen said, he's a kind guy, Camilla reflected. He sat there and entertained me all evening, treating me to ice cream and expensive cakes and coffee. Though no Molly had ever seen it, he could have done without it. For his script, he gave me a nice evening. She couldn't shake off her sadness for 2 whole days, and on the 3rd evening the doorbell rang briefly. It was her mom who opened it. She was expecting a girlfriend, but Andrew stood on the doorstep with a small bouquet of flowers. From that evening they began dating. Camilla quickly fell in love with him, angry at herself for it, and tried not to think about why he really wanted her. Especially since her mom consoled her. Oh dear, less believe all sorts of gossip. Envious girls are enough, sincere friends are few. And why did it all start? Sometimes it starts with such nonsense. No one's forcing him to go out with you now. If he's going out almost every day, it means he likes you. He's compared you and realized you're better than his ex. And why not? Camilla listened to her mom in silence. She didn't object. She wanted to believe her so she wouldn't get upset. Andrew had nothing to compare them to yet. They were just meeting as friends. They weren't intimidated at all by his lack of initiative. They'd always gone by his rules. And Camilla didn't resent that at all. It was enough for her that this guy was just in her life. So everything lasted until the summer. Until his birthday there were warm days and nights, windless in July, and celebrated the holiday at the dacha of Andrew's family. There were only his parents and Andrew's college friend and his wife, who had just returned from a wedding trip in the South. For Camilla, it was a day to meet Andrew's parents. Mom thought it was a good sign of his seriousness and even spent half of her salary on a new dress for her daughter. Although for a country house in the countryside, it was quite possible to get by with something simpler. That's what Camilla told her mom. Mom was amazed to learn that her not-too-confident daughter was not afraid of the upcoming acquaintance. The reason for Camilla's boldness was simple: she didn't believe it would last. One day Andrew would disappear as quickly as he'd appeared. If he doesn't go back to Molly, he'll meet a new attractive girl. He's too handsome and promising for Camilla, and he probably realizes it himself. That's what her friends had hinted. That's what Camilla herself thought. Of course, deep down she still wanted to believe that it was not them, but her mother who was right. Such a happy evening as this had never happened in her life before. She was acting like her usual self, just enjoying Andrew's holiday, and her parents' love for him. Both her father and mother and her friend Alex liked her, with absolutely no effort at all. Never before had she felt so at ease. The closer the day leaned towards evening, the more her confidence grew that this day was made for something special. Her parents had gone into town for the night, promising to stop by to see Camilla's mum. The newlyweds Alex and Sharon quietly secluded themselves in the attic prepared for them, and Andrew and Camilla were left alone by the brazier with almost transparent coals. Andrew seemed delighted to be joined with them. He casually placed on the table a bottle of expensive champagne that his boss had given him for his birthday. "Let's have this bourgeois beverage of splendor for the two of us to taste without guests," Camilla pronounced, raising her glass with the weighty bubbles playing inside it. "I'm so happy it's you I love, Andrew." "You're the nicest," the best she sounded back. All that night they spent together, and in the morning Andrew, after seeing his friends off, drove Camilla home himself. He pulled up at the market, jumped out of the car, returned 5 minutes later with a bouquet of burgundy roses. Camilla, well, her mum asked slyly, barely satisfied that her daughter's boyfriend was behind the wheel. "You're all glowing. You look gorgeous. Did he ask you to marry him?" "No, Mum, he didn't. But it's really been wonderful." "Well, don't get upset. Or at least let's hope he doesn't ask you tonight," Mum promised confidently. "I see you're in no mood to fight today or tomorrow." "Do you think you, Mother, have some kind of prude?" Camilla said. They hugged each other and laughed quietly and relieved. No tomorrow had to wait. In the evening, Andrew's family showed up in full force on the doorstep of his and his mother's flat. Andrew's father, putting delicacies on the table, announced that they were old-fashioned people, so they decided to ask for Camilla's hand in the family at home. But the wedding will be already in a restaurant, and all the canons. Then, at that time, many girls still dreamed of a fancy, big and solemn wedding, but Camilla was not one of them. She wanted a wedding like her daughter Beatrice's a quarter of a century later, light, small and elegant for those closest to her, but with a honeymoon trip that would be remembered for a lifetime. But no one had asked her opinion of her own wedding, and she had not even noticed it. She was sitting at the table, discussing something with her mother and future mother-in-law, and couldn't believe that all this was happening to her. Her beloved Andrew wants her as his wife. She will make sure he never regrets it. Andrew hasn't felt as happy in a long time as he does now that his divorce from his indifferent, aging wife has gone smoothly. Everything had worked out much easier than he had imagined. Camilla had done without scandals, threats, and hysterics, even without tears. Maybe she'd been living with him out of inertia for a long time, too. That would absolve him of some of the guilt he felt for the wife he'd left behind. Still, it seemed offensive. It hurt his ego. He thought he was the center of the universe, and she was letting him go for nothing. He was afraid that they had saved some unpleasant surprise for the day of divorce, but everything went mundane, like a visit to the therapist. Spouses with no minor children or property claims are divorced without too many obstacles. She's not dragging you through the courts, relax, Andrew thought. But Camilla kept her word, made the day he left. No claims, as long as Beatrice's interests were respected. She came to divorce indifferent and looked fresher. On Andrew looked without reproach, as a neighbor in a cramped underground carriage. "I wish he'd get out and make room." When they came out divorced, Camilla said indifferently. Bye, and walked away from the back, also looking completely unlike a lost and unhappy person. Andrew got the stupid feeling that he hadn't had a good time getting to know his ex-wife. Wow, an ex-wife now. I wonder how long she's been practicing that independent look. His friends called him a fool when they learned that he was making a drastic change in his life. Some directly and rudely, some diplomatically. The point didn't change. He didn't even take offense because he felt right. Some of them were driven by banal envy. It was enough to show a photo of his sunshine to ignite this envy. Someone just never had such a feeling, does not understand, or has forgotten for what a man all the achievements and victories. He was like that himself. He thought it was normal to return home to his wife to grow old together. They're just all living in hibernation, and he's suddenly awake. His father had been right in his day. Andrew had never once regretted marrying Camilla over the years. He only started dating her to show Molly. He too can be looked upon with the same adoration that he looked upon Molly with. Andrew's value in their eyes didn't increase one bit. But he suddenly realized that he wasn't really upset. because his attitude towards Molly had long since degenerated into some kind of bad habit and let go of the exhausting obsession of the last 2 years. And he was grateful to Camila for that. He felt so cozy and confident in her company that it was hard to give up that pleasant feeling, and he didn't need to. Camila did not demand anything from him, just enjoyed his company. His parents noticed the change in their son. It was impossible not to notice. He stopped being nervous and snapping for nothing, did not disappear at night, organized his regime, and remembered about his interest in work and career. Even the expression on his face was different. For 2 years they had been worried about the good that could end with their son's foolish love for a girl of easy behavior who only wanted to sell herself more expensive. Now they were silently rejoicing, afraid to jinx the unclear prospects by asking questions, and were also grateful to the unknown girl. Of course, Mum had done her best and made some inquiries. It wasn't such a big town that they couldn't find common acquaintances. Remember Margaret, my classmate who knits to order? Mum was in a hurry to tell Dad when she got home from work. Well, her cousin is a dispatcher at the same trucking company where the girl our Andrew is dating works in HR. And she says that this Camila is a very sweet and serious girl and without any flaws at all. So there you go. We'll see, Dad said with a short snicker. It's not for us to decide. Andrew usually avoided discussing his personal life with his father. They were too different, and his father had never liked his previous choices categorically. But after his son's 27th birthday party, when he introduced Camila to his family, he approached. We need to talk. The father tried to be persuasive. The girl is almost 25. Wow, in this day and age. And she's no worse than your ex-girlfriend. It's all clear about her. If you realize something, she just doesn't know it. Your mother and I notice the way she looks at you. You'll always know you're welcome and cared for at home. When the time comes, you'll appreciate that, won't you? If I were you, I'd marry her right away. You won't regret it. You'll remember my words with gratitude when I'm gone. You'll remember about girls sooner or later anyway. You'll have enough for a lifetime if you want to. And Andrew got married. His mum and dad are gone. It is unlikely that he would have been able to realize his steep life turn if they were alive, or would have had to hide the divorce with Camila, and the rest of his or his parents' lives they would never have understood and reconciled. They loved Camila as their own daughter. And most surprisingly, Camila genuinely loved them too. Sometimes he missed his parents, but now he was relieved that he would not have to face the undeserved dislike of his relatives. Since there were no relatives except Beatrice, the daughter didn't want to meet the lady. She's only a few years older than you. You must have something in common, Andrew told her. Dad, if I had to live in the same flat with your lady, I would look for something in common with her, so as not to complicate my life with negativity. I don't see the need. Sorry, we may never cross paths in our lives. I'm guessing your lady would be fine with that, too. I've already agreed not to hurt your feelings or say mean things to you. And that's hard enough for me right now, so don't make my life any harder. Please. Andrew realized Beatrice had always been closer to her mother than to him, so there was nothing to be surprised about. But his lady was upset by his refusal to meet her. I'm not even upset with myself, I'm upset with you. Your daughter does not want to make even the slightest effort to understand the feelings of her father, who did everything for her and continues to do. It's so natural to accept a share in a flat as a gift. But to make pleasant to her father an impossible labor, she was so sincerely upset that Andrew had to console her for a long time, and the next day to please her with a visit to a country restaurant with a complex of entertainment. She loved life so much, she was so happy with every surprise and gift. She gave her love after a day full of entertainment that any of his sorrows paled in comparison with this happiness. Happiness is. Now I remembered suddenly a precise phrase one had read somewhere, the first 2 months of a free life. Camila struggled with her old way of life, trying to change it. At first she latched on to the simplest thing what her grandmother had suggested. Guys, how about I come every weekend and spend at least a whole day walking and spending time with Sam in the winter, and you two will be alone during that time? Camila asked. But the guys rejected the offer. Don't take offense, we'd rather go somewhere with you and the family, they replied. The cultural program Beatrice and Scarlett had devised for her was very interesting, but for some reason she was not happy about it. Camila felt like a wedding general or a dressed-up bear when her daughter or a friend brought her to the theater or to an exhibition with a new hairdo and new dresses. They tried to entertain her, and she, unable to be genuinely happy, walked like a walking discontent, and she was ashamed of herself. Listen, it's like you're making titanic efforts on yourself. Scarlett's insight shone through. You don't have to pretend for us. Think about what you really want for yourself. I just want to lie around with a book so nobody can touch me, Scarlett said Camila. And the girls persuaded her to go on holiday, not to her relative's cottage, where she was eager to help her neighbors and relatives grow, harvest and prepare crops, but on a real holiday to enjoy the sea. Idleness, as Scarlett called it. Among her many acquaintances, Scarlett found a travel agency with super favorable offers, and in April Camila flew to Egypt. 10 days away from home, like on another planet. That's what she was really happy about. She reckoned she hadn't been to the seaside in 12 years, and with little Beatrice going every year, and then Andrew had started building a house and the house had eaten up almost all the finances. Beatrice had been going to the seaside alone to children's and youth camps ever since. Camila holidayed alone, avoiding noisy companies, and it did not weigh her down in the slightest. I think we should go on holiday every year, even in the off-season, and not to the beach, but to walk through different old towns, through quaint markets, through narrow streets. Camila returned feeling completely refreshed. She was immediately caught up in a whirlwind of events. It was good that she still had a few days of holiday left while she was dealing with her worldly upheavals. She'd forgotten that her in-laws were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary. The Pearl wedding's the day after she gets back, and she didn't even bring a present, just some oriental sweets and fruit teas. But her daughter Beatrice, who met her, laughed. She knew it. I've already bought everything from both of us, said Beatrice, Pearl. The in-laws celebrated their wedding at the camping site. Of the invitees, almost no one was surprised. Bill's parents didn't like fancy restaurants, they were natural people. Both were fond of fishing and hiking, long hikes in beautiful places. Keep in mind, all dinner jackets and evening toilets will smell of fire, my father-in-law warned. Camila even exhaled a deep sigh of relief when she learned that the event did not require a meticulous choice of dress, heels, elaborate hairstyle, and makeup. She began to suddenly understand her friend Scarlett, who was growing weary of it all. Instead of a long morning on the day of the anniversary, she had a good night's sleep, a leisurely cup of coffee, and was glad to put on loose beige trousers and a snow-white t-shirt from Egypt, which depicted 3 camels dancing against the pyramids. The weather was unusually warm for April. It's not often like this, but you should throw on a thick windbreaker, said Camila. Her hair was just loose around her shoulders. So be it. They say women over 40 shouldn't wear their hair long. Whoever made that up, let them not wear it, she decided. And she completely forgot that her swarthy skin makes her eyes look honey-colored after her holiday. That's how a tan goes, Camila thought, looking at herself in the mirror with pleasure. She didn't remember exactly when it had started, probably on holiday. There was a heavy lump in her chest, and she felt that she just liked living. Soon Beatrice and Bill would be picking her up, and her holiday would continue with a holiday at her in-laws' house. Soon it would be New Year's Eve again. It seemed like just yesterday they were celebrating the previous one. We should think of presents, plan something interesting. But there was no energy or ideas. Andrew was more exhausted than he'd ever been in the last year. More exhausted than he'd ever been. Not since his senior year, when he'd combined work with traveling and his degree. But when he'd been a kid, he'd had an easier time of it. Molly had noticed recently that he used to be a man of celebration, but now he was all dull and boring, despite her best efforts. At the word effort, Andrew perked up because he was surprised. It seemed to him that it was he who made all the effort, and she just lived on everything. And he didn't mind. But she must realize that his forces are no longer enough for an eternal holiday. I'm not a showman. I'm the chief engineer of the project, sweetheart, he joked. No, she has nothing to reproach him with. She's just too sensitive and she's young. An eventful life is important to her. New experiences. She was counting on him to give her all that. I'm thinking about where to take Sharon for New Year's Eve. Andrew shared his thoughts with his old friend Alex, having stopped by his family cottage for a glass of tea. I can't think of anything yet. We're going to the Emirates in March. That's been decided for a long time. And 2 trips in 3 months, I can't afford it yet. There are some fundamental flaws in the house. You've become a bit wooden, Andrew, said Alex. I understand, of course, that active love makes you thin, but in your case, it's not that. You're wrapped up. As a working housewife with 2 children. Alex made a scathing remark. As the owner, who didn't need to leave the house today, he had already taken enough whiskey to make him want to be frank. Thanks for the support and advice, Mate Andrew said ironically, hurt by the comparison. You're welcome. Who else would tell the truth but an old friend? Alex smiled. Let's get back to the specifics. How would you like to celebrate the new year yourself? Alex asked. I would stay at home, Andrew grinned. We'd invite you and Sharon and decorate the tree. We used to do that every year. What was wrong with that? The lineup changes, Alex said. We're already invited. We're not going to refuse. I'm sorry. Listen, why don't you and your beauty meet at home together? He suggested it. You two shouldn't get bored of each other yet. Romantic candles, cushions. We spent New Year's Eve at home last year because we didn't have time to book anything decent with the divorce. You know how messed up that was. And a second gray New Year's Eve like that, Sharon might be offended. Your problems are far from me, to be honest, Alex said. I don't know what to advise you. Listen, if your Molly were to be original and go to work, she would definitely be less bored and appreciate the joys of a simple holiday more. Don't give me that look. I'm not suggesting she has to carry sleepers, or sit and take orders in a supermarket, or even keep an eye on a conveyor belt of sacks. She's got some kind of fine maiden profession. Didn't she have a life before you? She's not a schoolgirl after all. She worked in a flower boutique. I told you, Andrew said. I told you it was a fine profession. Alex exclaimed. Give her a course for New Year's Eve, training some top-notch creative florist. That's what it's called. After which she'll get a job at some cool place. I'm dead serious, by the way, about showing real concern with this gift. Really? Andrew hesitated. So much for talking to you. It's become very difficult to find common ground. Over the years, we have much less in common than we did when we were young. I'll think about it, he said tiredly. Andrew wasn't ready to distance himself from his old friend. After the meeting with Alex, he had planned to visit his sick colleague, to pick up some paperwork, to discuss some things, but suddenly he decided to postpone the visit. He wanted to go home. He called and rescheduled the visit. The next morning, he felt he'd done the right thing. Andrew popped into his favorite places, the movie night cinema, the pastry shop, and the liquor shop. Tomorrow's Friday. What's stopping me from starting it today? As he drove up to the house, he remembered that he'd forgotten to call and tell Marion that he'd be an hour and a half early. Okay, it'll be a surprise. The light was on in the drawing room, but a quiet, melodious voice could be heard from the dark veranda. It was one of her amusing habits to chat with her girlfriends in the evening on the telephone on the open veranda, looking only at the distant chain of streetlights along the motorway. In summer, it was understandable. In winter, it didn't seem too comfortable, but she assured me it suited her just fine. Marion would throw on her coat, put on her boots, and go chatting. I can't have my serious lover listening to our nonsense. Marion shrugged her shoulders. A couple of times or 3 times he did overhear. He wondered what she was talking about to others, not to him. It was really minor chatter of girls advising each other on manicures, pool, bragging about gifts. Marion appeared very content with her life in these conversations. This pleased Andrew, and he listened to them no more. She was now chattering away to light rhythmic music and so did not hear or see Andrew drive up. The garage was on the other side of the house. He walked along the wall to the veranda to the voice that sounded like a stream until he began to distinguish individual words. I think of him very often, right in detail, Marion said. I imagine all the pleasant things that would happen if I did, and I realize that he can give me nothing but that. Yes, that's it, said her friend Julia. That's what I mean. I really don't want to be a short-sighted fool who ruins everything for a nice, easy affair. Yes, you're quite right, said Marion. That's why I haven't dared to meet him alone yet. I don't think I ever will. The only hope is that guys aren't chasing anybody now. Maybe he'll call one more time and then stop. I can't take that risk. You're right, Julia. I'm not that good at pretending. Somewhere, even if mine's a bit old for me, it's a safe bet. Yes, he's asking me to marry him, said Marion. I'm sure he will. You don't throw those options away. You realize that by the time you're 30, he will definitely do everything for me. Not like those who already have the bill at the restaurant in half. Thank you, Julia, for listening to me, she continued. I kept you late. Yeah, and I'm freezing. I'm going to my cabin. Bye-bye, kisses. The door slammed as the coffin board rattled overhead. Marion's light footsteps hushed in the hallway. Andrew stood leaning his forehead against the icy wall of his house. When had it gotten so cold? It had been plus not so long ago. It's a good thing Marion told him, he thought, or he'd have got married and written the will on the house in her name. I had no doubt that was the right and manly thing to do. Beatrice would get the flat anyway, and her husband had quite a well-to-do and prosperous family. While Marion had only him, she had convinced him of this so discreetly that he was sure it was his own decision. So it was not she who was the fool. It was he who fell into the well-known ancient trap, like so many before him, and did not dare to go into his own house and throw her out like a stray cat. He was well with her, after all. It was good for him, even if it was self-deception. He should give her some money, just to give her the money he had saved for a holiday with her in the Emirates. It's not a pity. She deserved it. It'll be enough until she finds a job. She'll go back to her mum's to live. She'd have a place to live. She wouldn't be lost, or at least she'd be happy with a new savory romance, not by calculation. He called her a taxi. Left alone, Andrew reached for the bottle of expensive sparkling wine he had brought today. Well, let's celebrate, he said. He'd never believed in the law of the boomerang, thought it was a consolation for losers. He believed that everyone gets only what he can get for himself. The rest is mysticism, and it's not. That mysticism had a place in his real life. What did Camila feel then, listening to his phone conversation? It's only been a year and he's been hit. His boomerang is light and fast. Fate had spared him yet. He hasn't had time to get married and put a lot of money into it. And Camila lived with him for a quarter of a century. And she always took away his fatigue. When he came home, he had everything that makes up a warm well-being, to which many only dream of reaching. He got, without the slightest effort, quite undeservedly, everything he had worked so hard to earn all the last year. His father was right. He had never regretted his sensible, convenient choice. And the kids hadn't gone anywhere either. Dad was looking in the water. No more father, no more mother, no more friends. It's only Camila's friends now. There's only one place left on earth he can go now, if he's accepted there. He would do anything to be accepted. No, not now, not in this miserable state. To think things over, to sleep, to work, to find the words. He'd honestly left the keys to their shared flat in the mailbox the day he left, so he had to wait a couple of hours for Camila to get home. Andrew found a parking space around the corner of a nearby office center, left the car there, and went for a walk. Probably Camila is helping young Beatrice to fuss with her granddaughter. Suddenly, Beatrice had already decided to go to work that would be very like her. He hadn't heard from her since the summer, and he hadn't had time to call her. She hadn't called him either, not even to wish him a happy birthday. And he didn't give it a second thought. Nothing, he'll catch up. All that fuss with his granddaughter, son-in-law, and fishing holidays. Beatrice doesn't know how to be angry long enough to play the Snow Queen. She's a lot like her mother. Andrew realized he was drinking his third cup of espresso at the shopping complex coffee shop. Time to go check it out. Surely Camila must have gone home by now. There were indeed lights on in the kitchen and living room windows. Andrew hesitantly hesitated in front of the intercom, but after a couple of minutes, the door to the entryway opened and a smell wafted out. A thin old woman with a small dog on a brightly colored watering can under her arm some subtly familiar figure from his neighbors. Ignoring the grandmother's condescendingly mocking look, he entered the entrance and, unnoticed by himself, found himself on his usual third floor at the light gray door and rang his bell, which he fumbled with without looking. Camila opened almost immediately. It seemed to him that at first she wanted to slam the door shut before he could get in, But then for some reason she changed her mind. She had recently returned from somewhere herself, probably a guest from some Friday night party, because between her and the threshold stood the dainty boots she had just thrown off her feet in puddles of melted snow, which Andrew hesitated to step over until she waved her head lightly. "Come in. What's wrong?" It was Camila, and at the same time completely not her. She had never been heavy-set, always just a woman of average height and build, but now she looked as light and casually graceful as a young girl. She had chosen to wear a dark chocolate shade that went so well with the unusual warm color of her eyes and skin tone. And her hair was not gathered in a smooth, comfortable ponytail at the back of her head, but was loose over her shoulders in a sort of artistic mess, like a Renaissance painting. She wore a simple flowing burgundy knee-length dress with a frivolous neckline that emphasized her slim waist. One could stare at her like fire for a long time. She had aged 10 years at least since he'd left her. Anyone would say now that the woman in front of him was a beautiful, attractive woman. Andrew had said so. "You've become very beautiful." "Wow." "Thank you," Camila replied, without any coquetry, smiling politely with honey-brown eyes, as if she had been told that every day her whole life. She held a short pause, waiting for him to say something else. But he remained silent. And then she softly, without irritation, continued on her own. "Look, Andrew, if there's anything important to do with me, say it at once. I'm expecting guests. You have no call, no warning, and I have my own plans. I can't give you much time right now. I'm sorry." "Could you forgive me?" He breathed out his question then. "So I forgave you a long time ago," Camila smiled with peaceful surprise. "Andrew, you didn't, for the sake of your career, join some secret society that requires official forgiveness of ex-wives certified by a notary, did you? You should call Beatrice more often. She'll never admit it, but she misses you." "Really?" Let's get to the point. What's your reason for coming here?" "I want you and our family back. I want to make things right. I was an idiot. I made a dead-end mistake, and I admit it outright. I hope I didn't realize it too late, because I haven't had time to do anything. I realize you haven't been expecting this for a long time in your feminine ego. I realize you need to take a pause, think things over calmly, and tell me when I can come over. I'm really sorry things didn't work out with your young friend. You were so enthusiastic I can't bear to call you a sneak or anything like that. And it doesn't make any sense now. I have someone I love." "Camila, we're adults. After my stupid prank, you had a right to get revenge. You've proved to me how wrong I was. Let's just agree not to relive any of these adventures." "You misunderstood me, Andrew, or rather, you didn't hear me. I didn't say I wanted to prove anything to you or to myself, much less to get back at you. You should have realized, after all these years, that I wouldn't do such nonsense, let alone look for a passing adventure. I told you that I have a man I love and I'm getting married. To the matchmaker's pearl wedding." Camila with her daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter arrived at the camp before everyone else. Bill always left for a long journey in advance. He assured half seriously, half jokingly, that his girls would definitely forget something, and they would have to go back anyway. And then they would ask him 10 times to stop for a walk and take pictures in beautiful places. That's more or less how it was. But that didn't stop the family from always arriving early. Margaret and Oliver chatted nonchalantly with the host about the merits of different types of smoked fish, as well as with Bill. They ran straight away to assess the meat for the kebab, while Camila and her grandson Sam went to see the lake. Sam loved water of all kinds, shapes, and temperatures, and yet he was already running quite well, so he had to be watched carefully and responded to her ideas promptly. Sam ran as maneuverably as bats fly, suddenly changing his trajectory. After her brooding holiday, Camila was a little weaned from the fast pace of life and had let her guard down. In April, it's mostly roach she remembered from the stories of the matchmakers, and it seems to be caught from the shore, Camila thought. She had not expected that there would be a rubber boat hidden in the thicket, and that Sam would jump into it. Hey Sam squealed like a pirate's cub and jumped up in the light boat so high that he almost fell overboard. Camila had a sort of tetanus at any unexpected danger, and it was pointless to fight nature. Rowing. Mum shouted a happy Sam, setting off in the dinghy aft away from the shore. Just then a silent fisherman in boots materialized from somewhere, entered the water and deftly, gently removed Sam from the boat. He was not frightened or upset, only laughed and showed him his tongue. "Hello, take this please," said the man with clear eyes and handed Sam to Camila. "Thank you," Camila replied, dropping the days. And they both laughed briefly, meeting each other's gazes. The fisherman had a neat short beard and gray hair, highlighted by gray hair and cheerful gray eyes. "Excuse us," Camila told him, and added, "For some reason we came here for a wedding anniversary. Only too early, so we get into all sorts of trouble. We're waiting for the others." "Everyone here is like that," the fisherman announced, "including me. I'm Stephen, classmate of the Happy Jubilee. It's better to just go with Steve." Camila and Sam, grandson of the Happy Jubilarians, Camila introduced herself. On both sides, she and Stephen became a couple. From that very day, they sat at the table next to each other, chatted about everything, danced only with each other to the violin on the wooden dance terrace. No one paid any attention to it, as if it went without saying that they were a couple and everyone was used to it. It was so strange and funny, and like they'd really known each other a long time ago. And not at all afraid that you could say or do the wrong thing and ruin everything. Margaret volunteered to help Camila put the restless Sam to bed, who only gave in at midnight. "Let the youngsters dance on the beach by the fire like primitive people," she said. "I'll cover my grandson with a blanket, stroke his back, and tell him quietly. Stephen's a very good lad, like Sam says about him, no double bottom. We used to talk almost every day when we were young, but then we got scattered to different cities. He's been in Kansas for years, and he still visits us, or we visit him every year. I'm surprised you two haven't crossed paths before today." "Yeah, well, we've never celebrated any anniversary this big. It was always just the two of us. I knew his wife well. Her name was Margaret, too. She passed away 7 years ago. They didn't tell anyone their heart, but I think that's why they didn't have children. They didn't want to risk it. Stephen was all alone, really all alone. Random girlfriends aren't in his nature. He needs someone to look after him. Of course, he's self-sufficient, and being alone hasn't changed him for the worse. But he's not happy about it. There's a reason Oliver and I decided to go out and celebrate our Pearl wedding in company. Something brought us together. I guess we're Cupid's family now. Would anyone have told me yesterday that I could be in this situation? I would have laughed incredulously, Margaret. Maybe even a little offended at being laughed at." Sam fell fast asleep, and they went back to their guests. The Pearl wedding was celebrated by the most stalwart of the guests until morning. Long gone from the tables, people relaxed into interest groups and flocked under the shoreline canopies to the bonfires or to the gazebos at the edge of the woods. Stephen walked Camila around the lake in the boat. She dozed in the pre-dawn mist in 2 woolen blankets, the top one lent by the barman of the tourist resort. "Do I look like a Bedouin?" she asked quietly. Yep, Stephen confirmed with satisfaction. By noon, all the guests had left, and the two of them stayed at the lake for a couple more days. They even caught a few perch and grilled them themselves on the grill until they were golden. "Why does everyone think that perch is a bland, tasteless fish that is only good for cooking?" Camila asked. It was delicious, a delicacy. And then Stephen went back to his place in Kansas and called every day and came up for weekends twice a month, and she'd gone to see him a few times already. The last time was early December. Slow, lazy snow fell vertically along the cathedral walls. Camila had come wearing thin gloves, and Stephen had brought her soft woolen mittens from the market. Now in this cold, he announced that the mitten would have to be removed for a little while. With careful tenderness, he put on her ring finger the ruby ring he had long hidden in her palm, and then he put her hand back in the mitten. "If you'll marry me, it's an engagement ring, and if not, it's just a gift from my heart," said Stephen. Back home, meeting her daughter and telling her news, Camila was shy and tried to appear a sensible lady, weighing up the pros and cons. "Beatrice, I've worked in this agency for so many years. It's all its own and all its own. I know from experience how long it takes women my age to find a job in a specialty. For employers, we're like pensioners. Not everyone understands our advantages." Camila hesitantly put forward another argument that should have seemed weighty. "Mum, come on. Recruitment agencies like yours are not exclusive. How many times have you thought about changing jobs yourself? Here's your chance, Beatrice said. Your strong Camila continued to argue. I'm sorry, Grandma. It's not that your help isn't important. It's just that you know very well that we're not helpless enough to make my young, beautiful mom a full-time grandmother. For our benefit, we already have a pearl couple of grandparents here. But we don't have any in other very interesting cities. And that's a shame. A happy grandma in Kansas is her own active holiday guide. There's so much to see when Sam's a little older, Mom. And anyway, that's not the point at all. Would you see yourself flying right now, not touching the ground, not pretending that you care about anything more than your love right now? That's perfectly normal, and we're all happy for you. Camila wrote a letter of resignation and worked out her fortnight. Colleagues, when she gave the reason for her dismissal, even a shadow of surprise ran across their boss's face. The girls giggled good-naturedly. She tried to see Scarlett more often. At least for a little while, because soon they'd have to see each other less often. Today after work, she'd run round the shops, looking at Christmas presents for her colleagues. Tonight she was expecting Scarlett to visit. She'd promised to bring a wedding hairstylist she knew. Scarlett, who was against all glamorous hairstyles, now claimed that she could go to the signing even in a jumpsuit. But it would be a crime not to make a stylish, romantic hairstyle out of her gorgeous long hair. Camila laughed and agreed. Let Stephen have his say, she said. Wow. And that same evening, her ex-husband showed up. Camila, I realize you were trying to get rid of your loneliness. Good for you. This whole thing has been good for you. I mean, it's been good for both of us. You've blossomed. I realize that you should appreciate what you have, not chase illusions. You know in your heart that it's not worth it to be adventurous at our age. We have too much in common. It won't be so hard for us to start over. By the way, I've almost finished the house, just a few minor details. Would you like it? Maybe you could do some decorating tips, get involved. Well, we could live there and rent this place out. It's no longer cramped when there's a view just a stone's throw away. Well, you probably remember. We'll go mushroom picking. You love mushrooms. In summer we'll go on holiday to the sea, so no vegetable gardens. We can go together with young people or take a granddaughter. Or we can even just the two of us to renew our feelings, he said. Everything has fallen apart, Andrew. There is nothing to renew, said Camilla without a shadow of gloating or irritation. I'm grateful to you for the good things we had, for our wonderful daughter. And for this incident, as you call it too. Before this incident, I lived my life and did not even know what I could be, what kind of man could be with me, what happiness felt like. I could have lived my whole life and never known it. You must understand me. You said something like that a year ago. I was wrong, Andrew replied. You're not afraid of being wrong, you see. I'm not afraid, Camila smiled with quiet confidence. Andrew's eyes glittered with the cold anger that had once robbed her of her will and strength. She decided it was time to show him the door. She didn't feel like exchanging insults. They had absolutely no place in her current life. But Camila had to do nothing. She was saved by 4 short, cheerful doorbells. Scarlett came in, and with her was a tall, thin girl wearing a hat with a huge pompon. Well, meet Chloe, the wedding fairy stylist. And this is Camila, our bride. Oh, and this is Camila's ex-husband, she added. He came personally to congratulate and wish his ex-wife happiness in her new marriage. Very modern. Hello, Andrew. Scarlett gave him a look that wasn't the best of looks. Andrew snatched his jacket off the rack and walked out of the flat without looking back. He didn't remember how he... You are, Andrew said indifferently. My ex-wife left me, and I was on my way back to her. I thought she would be happy, forgive me. But she's getting married in a year. So much for a woman's fidelity. She was a decent woman who had a home, a job, a granddaughter. What can anyone else say? He was desperate to speak out to someone he didn't know. And breathe into a tube, please, suddenly remembered after his philosophical revelations of the police officer. At home, Andrew immediately called Beatrice, apologized for not calling for a long time, asking about his grandson and when he could see them all. Maybe we could go to a water park together? Or whatever Sam likes best, he asked. Dad, did something happen to you? Beatrice asked immediately. Yes, daughter. And I need you to be my ally. There's no one else to talk your mother out of doing something stupid, Andrew said. Not so long ago you were such a romantic, putting passion above everything else, her own daughter snorted gloatingly. Andrew told her all about his separation from Marion. Beatrice, a good impressionable girl. Beatrice likes to pretend to be cynical sometimes, so that her kindness is not overused. She listened to her father attentively and seemed really to sympathize. I knew it, she said. And she hadn't even said one mean thing about Marion. Then Andrew began to ask her to influence his mother. Camila is a clever woman, and a clever man learns from other people's mistakes. And wouldn't Beatrice want her mom and dad to be together again? Try, Beatrice said softly. Let's be honest. I'm a little past the age of teenage trauma that comes with parental divorce. Your marriage is over, and you wouldn't have had one or the other. I'm really sorry you got one. You're not the worst choice for a woman to be attracted to, not just because of the house and the money. You're still pretty good, really. But if Mom agreed to come back to you now, that's what I'd call a mistake. That's when I'd talk her out of it. You lived with her because she was comfortable. She deserves to be loved, not just a comfortable, good wife. And now she has that. And I wish the same for you. I see. Got a share in the flat and no more dad, Andrew said. Okay, you little bitch. He dropped the call and switched off the phone. He didn't feel like getting up in the morning, and what's more, he couldn't. When you drink alone, the hangover is somehow always harder than after the same dose of booze in a company gathered for a fun occasion. Probably the occasion also affects. Although smart doctors do not write about it anywhere. I wanted to send a message to my boss that I was ill and needed 24 hours to recover. I remembered that today was a day off, fell asleep again, and slept for another 3 hours. After a contrast shower, I slowly began to come to my senses and switched on the phone. He was used to being in responsible positions. He always had to be in touch. Without communication, he felt disconnected from the world, afraid of missing something. Andrew counted 13 unanswered calls, all from Marion. He must not have been very convincing when he kicked her out of his house. He just couldn't be rude to her. She has some special talent for looking at a man in a way that makes you want to be intimate with her. Girls like that can get away with anything as long as there are simpletons like him in the world. Andrew's musings were interrupted by a phone call. It was her again. I can't run away from her like a boy, he said, and answered it. Andrew, don't answer the phone, Marion's melodious voice pleaded, bewildered. I have news that may be important to you. Yeah? It's going to be hard for you to come up with something new to hook me. Trust is lost. Let's not waste time. I've tried that on my other partners, but I'm pregnant. But I am pregnant, Marion sobbed desperately into the phone. And I haven't had any other partners. No one but you. Well, I had some fantasies, but I didn't fulfill them. Who hasn't? I wouldn't have cheated on you. I know me. I really didn't know about the baby when you kicked me out. I felt sick yesterday, nauseous from the broth. I took a test and I found out. You can take a DNA test and make sure it's your baby. Wait a minute, Andrew managed to cut in on Andrew's wailing. Do you want to have the baby? Yes, I do. It's about time. And I really want to. Do you need financial support for the baby? I need a father. He needs his daddy, Marion cried softly. Daddy, huh? But what's the play for? I'm not acting. I really want things to get better between us. I promise never to lie to you. And with a baby, I won't have to do anything stupid. Mom raised Marion on her own, called her princess, dressed her like a doll. She was good at sewing, working a convenient schedule and taking sewing orders home. From the age of 3, she gave Marion to dance, took her to different circles. Except for dancing and singing, she showed no interest in anything. Learned too without much zeal, but went in the favorites of most teachers, and often received a grade higher only for the charm and ability to raise the mood of others. Mom saw and understood all this, and was not at all saddened that her daughter will not be Sofia Kovalevskaya or Margaret Thatcher. She clearly has a different fate, and let it be happy. The girl grew up very pretty and artistic, with a beautiful slim figure. She could become an actress with such external data, but this requires determination, which Marion did not possess. She was only interested in what was easy, and the prospect of making efforts for the sake of his goal caused her bouts of ennui. A charming blonde with a fine figure and delicately beady blue eyes, she became the center of any company, pushing aside the wittier and brighter girls. Her mother was afraid that Marion would repeat her fate of having a foolish affair, imagining it to be the love of her life, and being left alone with a child. She implored her princess heartily. "I have no money or connections, and you have no special abilities, no desire to achieve something." "Well, no, I don't. What can I do? But you're beautiful and sweet, with an easygoing nature. Everybody likes you." "That's a great opportunity, too. We can't all be independent and self-sufficient. You just need to get your feminine destiny right once, wisely choosing a husband who will provide for you so that you don't spend your life in endless work like I did. There's certainly no good in that." If algebra and English were difficult for Marion, she understood these suggestions of her mother's from the word go. Mom had no need to fear. Yes, Marion politely and sweetly accepted the advances of young men who could not offer an affluent life. Sometimes it made her sad. A couple of times she was even sad for a month at a time. Some guys she really liked. But the life of Mom and many women around her demonstrated the fact love does not last long, and then only struggle with life's problems together with someone or alone. She didn't dream of conquering a real rich man. She didn't believe in such fairy tales. She was a very practical person. She would be satisfied with just a fairly well-to-do, firmly on his feet, in respect of which you can be completely confident. She didn't go for casual flings, so as not to spoil her reputation. It only seems like a big city. By the time she was 30, her experience consisted of only 2 lovers, both more or less the kind of man she had in mind. In both cases, Marion's plans were thwarted by wives and minor children. Both wives were tenacious, not willing to let their husbands go. They involved the whole family in psychological processing, blackmailed with children and division of property. Marion was losing. But she wasn't discouraged. When she met Andrew, she realized he was the one. In their flower boutique, he came for an original bouquet for the wife of his boss, to whom he was invited to a birthday party. "This is not a corporate or personal holiday for loved ones," explained a Marion polite man in a decent suit, so that she better understand what kind of bouquet is needed. Marion liked the visitor. She had her principles, and was squeamish about even promising options if the man didn't seem pleasant. Now she smiled and motioned that he would surely come again. She'd been lucky his daughter was now grown and married, and his wife was of the obscure but not dangerous type. And now she was lucky again. It is only necessary to behave correctly, to finally grow up and put aside young fitness instructors and other entertainment seekers. A baby's not bad either. Now that's kids she really likes. Alex looked at his friend with his trademark wistfully ironic grin that people sometimes took offense to. But Andrew didn't care right now. "What can I tell you?" Alex pondered aloud, leaning on the bar. "It's not the worst way out for you. The feeling of not being needed by anyone is probably much worse. Parents are gone. Ex-wife and daughter are happy without you. And then one day you're a young dad again. They say late fatherhood is the most realized." Alex raised his index finger admonishingly, then rubbed his forehead. "What if you have a son? You were always jealous that I had 2 boys. You'll be the favorite authoritative dad, the big boss. I'm not encouraging you to live with his mom, although that's up to you. You can't just go straight to her. I don't believe that. And you finding out what she's really like isn't a bad thing. Anyway, I'm staying out of it." Alex went home in a taxi, and Andrew decided to get some air and walk around the evening city to get his mind off things. After all, he was a little drunk, but not drunk enough to fall asleep anywhere. The bar where they were sitting was in the center, not far from the station square, which was rather nicely decorated for the new year. Andrew was drawn there for some reason, to walk through the lively crowd. It looked like some kind of train had recently arrived. People with luggage were coming into the square, chatting animatedly with those greeting them. And Camila. Suddenly she came out, his ex-wife in a dainty crimson down jacket, looking like a girl. A tall, bearded man held her gently by the shoulders, and a lot of people were looking at them for some reason. They were not just walking, though, but talking and laughing quietly. Andrew stopped under a painted lantern and they saw him. "Hi, Andrew. Camila said, completely unconcerned. Hi, Camila. I heard about the wedding coming up. Congratulations. I have a son on the way. Wow, that's great. Camila's companion smiled broadly and openly. Then we congratulate you too. Thank you. Well, I'll go to the family. Andrew waved his hand and quickly disappeared into the crowd. And who was this slightly inebriated knight of the sad image? Stephen asked, raising one eyebrow amusedly. My ex-husband, Camila replied. If he's not lying, I'm happy for him. But then I'm happy for the guy too. I owe him a lot after all. Andrew watched them get into the taxi, chatting and laughing, and when they left, he went to the station taxi driver and gave Marianne's address.